pieces of literature that we have is found in the let's start. Okay. Jay the Alcoholic. And God's doing for me today what I couldn't do for myself. One of my favorite pieces of AA literature, aside from our big book, and by the way, this is the 4th edition of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you're not using it, you're not using the book that the new guy's using. If you're not familiar with the new stories that are in here, how the heck are you going to be of service to somebody who's new in the fellowship? Oh, well, my notes are all in it. Well, put them in the other book. You mean you haven't grown a little bit since then? Just an opinion.
Thanks, Jay.
I came in 1979. The 3rd edition came out in 1978. Nobody was telling me, oh, my big book is better than yours. My stories are better than yours. Oh, page 449. Oh, I don't know. What do they call it nowadays? It's called Acceptance is the Answer, is the name of the story in the book. Call it by its right name. Anyway, just a little opinion. And I got sober in an AA that wasn't 164 pages. You know, it's the whole book. It's the whole book. Just to stir it up a little bit. But another piece of literature that I really like is The Language of the Heart. And in The Language of the Heart, there's some correspondence between Bill Wilson, our co-founder, who in 1961, because a lot of his mentors had passed, he wrote a letter to Carl Jung. It was regarding the patient that Jung had, whose name was Roland Hazard. And Roland Hazard was the guy who carried the message to the guy that carried the message to Bill. And he was a member of the Oxford group, but he had all the money in the world, and he still couldn't get sober. And anyway, so Bill wrote a letter describing the program, sent some pamphlets and some books to Dr. Jung, and this is the letter that Jung replied. Dear Mr. W., your letter has been very welcome indeed. I had no news from Roland H. anymore and often wondered what had been his fate. Our conversation, which he had adequately reported to you, had an aspect which he did not know. The reason that I could not tell him everything was that though in those days I had to be exceedingly careful of what I said, I found that I was misunderstood in every possible way. Thus, I was very careful when I talked to Roland, but what I really thought about was the result of my experiences with many men of his kind, alcoholics. His craving for alcohol was the equivalent, on a low level, of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, expressed in medieval language, the union with God. How could one formulate such an insight in a language that is not misunderstood in our days? The only right and legitimate way to such an experience is that it happens to you in reality. And it can only happen to you when you walk on a path which leads you to a higher understanding. You might be led to that goal by an act of grace, or through a personal and honest contact with friends, or through a higher education of the mind beyond the confines of mere rationalism. I see from your letter that Roland has chosen the second way, which was under the circumstances obviously the best. I am strongly convinced that the evil principle prevailing in the world leads the unrecognized spiritual need into danger, if not counteracted either by real religious insight or by a protective wall of human community. An ordinary man, not protected by an action from above, and isolated in society, cannot resist the power of evil, which is called very aptly the devil. But the use of such words arouses so many mistakes that one can only keep aloof from them as much as possible. These are the reasons why I could not give a full and sufficient explanation to Roland, but I am risking it with you because I conclude from your very decent and honest letter that you have acquired a point of view above the misleading platitudes one usually hears about alcoholism. You see, alcohol, in Latin, is spiritus. And you use the same word for the highest religious experience as well as for the most depraving poison. The helpful formula, therefore, is spiritus contra spiritum. Thank you again for your kind letter. I remain, Carl Jung. So, we need the spirit to go against the spirits of alcohol. And what we do on retreat, or what I believe that we do on retreat, and what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous, is that we form a protective wall of human community. And when a guy comes into the Parker Men's Stag, the first thing we do is we take him and we bring him up over that wall. And we get him in the middle of the pack. And we start to teach him these things by, first it's like an honest contact with friends about, getting comfortable enough to be able to come back to the meeting, and then getting a sponsor, and then going through the steps, which then lead us to this higher understanding that leads us beyond the confines of mere rationalism, beyond just this normal stuff that we walk around in thinking that this is reality. And so I love this. I love this letter, and it's in the language of the heart, or you can Google it. It's on the internet, like just about everything is nowadays. So, the Oxford group, which all the early members of Alcoholics Anonymous were members of the Oxford group. Bill and Lois went to Oxford group meetings the first 3 years of their experience of his sobriety, and what it was kind of an evangelical Christian movement. It was not a sect, but it was a group of women and men that had found a set of spiritual exercises that relieved them from their problems. And what they always talked about is that you don't have to believe anything. But what we ask you to do is to make an experiment. And what we're asking you to do is make an honest experiment. So this weekend, for the next about 30 hours, 27 hours, because that's all we're going to be together, is I'd like to ask you to make an experiment. And the experiment is this. Let's pretend that God is everything. You don't have to tell anybody. You don't have to define God. But let's just pretend that it's everything. And then, come Sunday afternoon, when you go home, before you have the first fight with the wife, because of course we've all been out being spiritual, come home and there's immediately conflict. But anyway, what you do is take a look at what happened in your thinking and in your heart over the course of this weekend. Now, as far as a framework for this retreat, Bill Wilson's mentor in the Oxford group was a guy by the name of Samuel Moore Shoemaker. And Sam Shoemaker's hands are all over the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Guys that he worked steps with were the guys that got the Oxford group started in Akron so that Bill could find a meeting when he was there. And he was a remarkable guy, remarkable man. And he said that there are 4 things that if we're going to have a clear channel to this God as we understand God, if we're going to be able to actually work the 10th and the 11th step, if when we ask for guidance in our day that we're plugged in instead of just running around blind, there are 4 things which needed putting right in my life. Okay? The first is, is there was a person that I would not forgive. There was a person that I would not forgive. Second, there was a restitution that I would not make. There was a restitution that I would not make. Third, there was a doubtful pleasure that I would not give up. How did he know? Huh? And fourth, there was a sin in the long past that I would not confess. Now again, when I say God, I'm not saying what you think I'm saying. Okay? And I'll be using terms that are, I love this thing about it being medieval language. The word sin comes from the sound of an arrow missing a mark, missing the target. That's what it comes from. So I don't know what it is what kind of baggage you may hang on that word, but anyway, sin is an error in the long past that I would not confess. And then he said, when these things were straightened out, I not only came into a new power and release, but for the first time, I began to get daily guidance which I knew could be relied upon. Sam was a remarkable, remarkable character. And I have found that this is a great way that if you get a guy that comes to you in crisis, that you can go through. And so during the course of this weekend, we're going to look at these 4 points. So we're a group of men, and probably one of the most important questions that we have is, why did God create women? And in my time in Alcoholics Anonymous, what I've come up with is so that men would learn to pray honestly. Because there is nothing that brings us to our knees. There is nothing that flattens our ego like the higher power. Okay? So, I talk to you. I come into this Manhattan Beach Club, and I'm running around, and I start working after 30 days, and I started tending bar. And one evening, this creature comes in, and we start running around together. And God's will was operative in my life. A few weeks later, she moves the husband out, gives me the keys to her vet. Obviously, I'm working a very bitchin' spiritual program. And then about 4 or 5 weeks after that, she decides she wants what I really have, and she wants to get sober. And so I bring her to the meetings and introduce her to all the old-timers. Teach her to sit down in the brain damage section in the front where my sponsor set me. And life is large. I have it so that, I'm not really, we were involved before she came into AA, so it's not like I'm taking advantage of a newcomer. Right? And so, anyway, we're going around, we go running around for about 4 months, and then she leaves me for another woman and brings her to the group. And they sit in the seats that we used to sit in. And I learned that great thing that many of us experience in Alcoholics Anonymous of cruising the parking lot, looking at the cars, trying to decide whether or not we can go into the meetings. I know that doesn't happen, with you guys, but it happens in Southern California. And so I'm just beside myself. I'm just all screwed up. And I go to the Alano Club and I'm sitting out front waiting for the club to open, and there's Irish Dan. Now, I don't know how you get sober without Irish Dan. And Dan had been sober at that time about 30 years. And he says, "What's wrong with you, kid?" So I, was just waiting to be able to once again tell this tale of woe. I've got to, it's like any problem that we have, any problem that we really, that we think we have. There's the 2-minute version, there's the 8-minute version, and then there's the box set. Or if you get somebody in the coffee shop, you can give them an hour and a half, and you never breathe once, right? Because you don't want them to give you any real experience, strength, and hope. So Dan says, "Well, what's your prayer life like, kid?" "What are you talking about?" I didn't say that. "Didn't you listen to me?" He says, "What's your prayer life like?" Well, I said, I'm an AA guy. I got like 6 months of sobriety. And so, when I get up in the morning, I was taught in Alcoholics Anonymous that prayer was to be honest and to be personal. So when I get up in the morning, what I'm doing is I'm getting down on my knees and I'm going, "Help!" Because I was really, really thirsty for about 4 months. I mean, like every third thought was a drink. And then I'd say the Serenity Prayer 1,800 times during the course of the day. I'd stop at a couple of meetings. I'd say the prayers at the meetings. And when I got home at night, I'd go, "Thanks." Because I couldn't believe that I got home sober. I didn't have anything to drink that entire day. So that's my prayer life. And he says, "Well, kid, the saying the Serenity Prayer 18,000 times is all fine and good." He said, "But we're going to make you a real prayerful man." He says, "You got a job, right, kid?" "Yeah, I got a job." See, I got sober before newcomers had a union. The union started in about 1987. And so like if you even started to talk about a feeling in a meeting or anywhere around Alcoholics Anonymous, an old timer just throw you up against the wall and go, "Do you have a job?" "What?" And he said, "So you got a job, kid, right?" "Yeah, I got a job." And he said, "You're alcoholic, so you drive to work the same way, no matter what, every time, right?" "Yeah, right." He said, "Okay, so this is what I want you to do. I want you to get a God spot. I want you to get a God spot. When you're on your drive to work, I want you to pick a place where you will make a conscious contact. All I want you to do is just say hi. And then when you go home from work, you do the same thing. So I have doubled your prayers right there." It was true. It was true. And an interesting thing, for me, it was when my car would be going down Vista Del Mar and I'd turn, you hit the Pacific Ocean and I'd see the ocean. I'd just go, "Oh yeah." And I'd go, "Hi." Now the great thing about hi, so I'm going, "Help! Hi. Hi. Thanks." The nice thing about hi is that it's an invitation to a conversation. And it would not, after a little while, maybe a couple days, it wouldn't stop with just hi. And I'd start to think about like people that I knew that were having trouble in the meeting. Or about people that I maybe was in conflict in my life. And what it did is it drew me out of myself. Because, see, I am selfish and self-centered. The whole world revolves around me. But that saying hi, what it did is it brought me out of myself. This was such a remarkable occurrence that, then a couple weeks later, he got me aside and he said, "How's it going, kid?" "Oh, it's going good." He said, "Okay, now we're going to crank it up a little bit." He said, "Do you ever have any trouble at work?" How did he know? He said, I want you to get, you know how in the boxing ring there's a neutral corner? He said, I want you to get a God spot at work. So I'm tending bar at the time. You know, it's not, doesn't really give itself to, you know, dropping to my knees in prayer. And, but there was a part over on the rail where I could go, and if I put my hand on it, the big guy and I both knew what I was doing. I was saying, hi, and I might need a little help here. And so all of a sudden I got this spot at work where I can go. Now, how many of you guys live with other people? Don't live by yourselves. Okay? Same thing works in the home. You don't have to tell anybody that when I come over at this windowsill and I go like this, I'm praying. But I know, in my heart of hearts, and whatever it is this creative principle is, knows that what I'm doing is I'm reaching outside of me. So suddenly, I've gone from 2 periods of prayer that were kind of jackknifed into just me doing something that I really didn't feel comfortable with, to about 8 to 10 times that I was making conscious contact. And that's all it is. That's all it is just being conscious for a moment that there's something going on outside of my mind. Which is a pretty stunning stretch. Because when I got here, I was really important to me. And the great thing is that I'm kind of clued into the joke now. Now, another great thing to do is terrorizing new guys with this concept. Now, I'm brutal because I can do it now. You know, they don't swing at me very often, but I like to really fuck with them, and I'll go up and say, you know, I've got a really personal relationship with Jesus. And Jesus has revealed to me that his favorite thing to do is to have a cigarette with a new guy. And I'm absolutely sincere about it. You know, I would never, you know, you drop the Jesus part, but the truth is that every new guy just about smokes, right? And so what you do is you get them to put God or just a G on their cigarette pack. And every time they go out to have a cigarette, that they look and find some place where, you know, because they got to go outside now, and to look and to find a place and to burn one with the big guy. And if a guy smokes 3 packs a day, he's the most prayerful man in the meeting, right? But this is how we draw ourselves out of ourselves. I like to call these stupid God tricks. You know? Because if you do them, something happens. And try it. Try it and see what happens. So that's what my conscious contact is. It's drawing me out of myself. Whatever it is that I can do that draws me out of me. That's why Alcoholics Anonymous meetings are so wonderful. And, you know, meetings are spiritual chemotherapy. They, you know, my disease has no idea what's going on when I go to it. Now, I can't, again, you know, it's pre-union AA. So, I had to go to a meeting every day in my first 3 years. Oh my God! Well, okay, so I got a day off for laundry when I had about 6 months over from my 9-month chip. But what happened is I went to a meeting every day. And in my day, the most important thing that I was doing was going to a meeting. See, to me, Alcoholics Anonymous is the most important thing in my life. Still is. Still is. And so I need to put myself in the consciousness of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what is the consciousness of Alcoholics Anonymous? First and foremost is that we don't have to drink today. And that it is safe here. And are your meetings safe? One of the responsibilities about being a dynamic men's stag is making sure that when you're at the mixed meetings, that the predators know that we know who they are. And that we make sure that our meetings are safe for our sisters. That's our responsibility. And that when we're out and about, that we are looking for how it is that we are able to carry this message and make sure that the environment is safe for men and women to come into and recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So, is it safe here? Now, this is our first retreat. And so what we're doing this weekend is amazingly important. Because what we're doing here is we're establishing a consciousness that will go on from here to October, to next year, on and on and on. And we need to make sure that this is a safe place here. So I'm going to implore you that what is said here stays on this mountain. Unless the other man that's involved, the person that's involved, gives his permission. Because we're going to be doing some important spiritual exercises up here, and it needs to be safe. And, our co-founder, Dr. Bob, he had like a 5-minute talk, his last talk. And one of the things he said is that we have to watch out for gossip. And what is gossip? Gossip is any conversation that I have about somebody that's not in the room. So we have to be careful with. I mean, as long as we know what we're doing, but let's be conscious about this. So, is this a safe place here? Now, yeah, thank you. This weekend, what we're going to do is we're going to be doing some self-examination. And we're going to be doing some sharing. Now, you don't have to, bust out anything that you don't want to. But there are some things sometimes when they're shared at a group level that, if it's safe, that it's very, very helpful. That's even, there's one thing about doing it with your sponsor, but if we share it at a group level, we may find out that we're not quite as unique as we think. Sam Shoemaker said that there's only one sin. There's only one mistake. And that's believing that I am different. There's only one mistake, believing that I am different. One of the reasons that I believe that alcoholism is a disease more today than I did when I came in is the 5 steps that I've heard. And believe me, I have heard a number of them. And they're all the same. I mean, we're alcoholic males. We're just not that creative. The shock for our sisters is finding out how truly shallow we are. Some of us may be a little more flamboyant than others, but we all destroy ourselves in exactly the same way. So, what I would like to do is, what we need to do is we'll get together and we'll talk a little bit about. See, in a room of alcoholic men, there is a tremendous amount of pain that's in this room. And that can be left here. Or a piece of it can be left here. So, first of all, we're going to get together in small groups, and I'd like you to share about why are you here? Share about whether or not you believe that this place is safe, that you're willing to make a commitment, a spiritual commitment to making this place safe, not just for you, but for alcoholics for generations to come. My home group's retreat, we've been at our current location for 15 years, I think. And it's a spin-off from a retreat house that closed, and that retreat's been going for over 45 years. And then the other thing is there something that you'd like to leave here? Now, what is it that I wish was not true about myself? A friend of mine taught me that how do you know that you're living in God's will? If I can tell my daughter, my wife, and my sponsor what's going on at this moment. And for me, what I wish wasn't true about myself is that occasionally, I know this doesn't happen to any of the men in the Parker Men's Stag, but on occasion, when I'm on the internet, I end up at sites that I can't even defend to myself, much less to the people that I love. And it violates my wife's trust. It makes it so that my computer is not a safe place for her to go, and my computer's in our home. And I'm real good about dropping it for a period of time, and then every now and then I'll pick it up again. And I know that it isn't anything that people get strung out on, but I'll go on a run for a few weeks with it, and I feel horrible about it. And that's the thing that of everything in my life, like I say to new guys, if you think I'm full of shit, come and spend the day with me. See how I treat my wife. See how I treat my employer. See how I treat my cat. See how I treat my daughter. But of everything that's the thing that I'm most embarrassed about who I am in my personal conduct. Okay? And I would like to be able to leave that here. So, again, you don't have to drop this out loud to anybody up front, but if you want to share about that, you can. Now we're going to get to the most difficult part of the retreat, which is that we're going to count off. And so this is really, really hard. Because I'm thinking about me the whole time they're counting, and then when it gets to me, I'm still thinking of me. So, and we're going to get together in small groups. We're going to get together in small groups. Hopefully you won't be, hanging out with your Goombas, because again, we're creating a different dynamic. There's 8 groups. You can go outside. There's some small rooms. You can go upstairs. You can put a couple of groups in here. Spend about 45 minutes. I figure if we've got 8 groups of 8, that everybody can share in an hour easily, and then we'll come back here at is that at 11? At 11:15. So you got time to smoke. You got time to share. And then we'll be back here at 11:15. So
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. No. It was a rough night last night. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1.
I'm now going to introduce you to my fabulous wife, Adele. And you're going to hear a lot about her this weekend. Because the great fact is that I have a sober home. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And she's brilliant. She's aside from a lot of things about her. She's a columnist, and she has a way of putting things in words that's really cool. So along the weekend, I'm going to read you a few columns from her, of hers. The television and radio have been turned off in our home and my car for a month now. Coincidentally, during that time, I have not been afraid. As a lifelong television watcher and noise addict, I began to watch my television habits change a number of years ago. My husband Jay killed his television before and seldom watched the several I brought into the relationship. He was, thank goodness gracious, during the years of my incessant watching and simply left the room when I grabbed the remote. Sometimes I turned on the TV so that he would leave. He eventually figured that out, but he was kind nevertheless. Some years ago, my compulsion to watch primetime television dropped away. For many years, I had found daytime television to be loud and violent and frankly ridiculous, and the commercials unbearable and even louder. I learned that the volume of commercials is turned up. Yet I watched Jerry Springer or Judge Judy or whatever fit the "where did those people come from" paradigm, as if my head were craned toward a freeway accident, knowing that gawking was inappropriate, but unable to stop. Then I turned the channels to cable TV and started watching better nonsense for a few more years. I found myself thinking that I ought to know what was going on in the world, so I watched CNN too. Concurrent to the television experiment, I increased my exposure to spiritual books, workshops, tapes, and CDs of spiritual teachings. Joel Goldsmith, Barbara Moll, Eckhart Tolle, and Byron Katie, to public radio. I had long before abandoned network radio, but mostly I listened to the radio. Interestingly enough, I began to correlate my anxiety to what I was listening to and watched it decrease during the discussion of spiritual truth. Though spending most of my radio time listening to wonderful shows like This American Life and LA Theater Works Radio Theater, I often listened to the BBC and National Public Radio News. I found the reporting deeper and coverage at much higher quality level. Something in me still believed I was supposed to be apprised about what was going on in the world. The discovery I made, however, was that constant intake of broadcast news, however reported, instilled in me a river of fear, one drop at a time. 2 years ago, I stopped watching the news completely. About the same time, I limited my watching to HBO, Showtime, IFC, and the Sundance Channel. Still, I turned the television on whenever things got quiet. I felt lonely or I felt bored. I surmised that Sex in the City and The Sopranos were more artistic than American Idol and felt appropriately superior. Jay learned never to approach the bedroom between 8 and 10 o'clock on Sunday nights. This summer, I watched myself spend hours in bed watching TV. Although I had many, many things to do, I couldn't get up to do them. If I did get up, I brought my projects to the television or the television to the projects. I watched and watched myself do that and recognized at some point that I was powerless to do anything else. Thinking I should stop, or judging my behavior as bad or good or lazy or whatever, was less than useless. It actually produced more of the undesired effect. And there I stayed for 2 months, watching the television from my bed and observing myself. Then one day in July, I didn't turn on the TV. It's been off since. Perhaps I'll turn it on again one day, but the need to is gone. I find that remarkable. During those hours frozen to the television, I discovered that the story of my life has been about my attempts to postpone now. I attempted to do that with activity, radio, paralysis, and particularly television. I did it because I was afraid of what this moment now might contain. That it would not be good enough. That it should be different, and so on. So I tried to make now stop. Because now, the only thing that ever is impossible to stop. I ended up merely distracting myself. In doing so, I missed the joy of being. Life is a process of awakening. Until a certain level of awakening me had already taken place, the television and the radio had to be blasting. I understand that and am simply grateful now for the shift. It's amazing how beautifully long a day is when one is in it. Kill your television. The only reason that sports exist is to sell us beer and trucks. Okay. So I was talking a little while ago about meetings. Why I go to meetings. Why do I go to meetings? Well, this creative principle, this God as I understand God, the universe or whatever, knows that I'm a fairly busy guy. And that, but God as I understand God knows that on Monday night I'm at the Hermosa Beach Men's Stag. On Tuesday evenings there's a meditation group for men at my house. We spend a half hour listening to a spiritual teacher, Eckhart Tolle, and then we spend a half an hour being silent together. Wednesday nights I'm at my spiritual teacher's house, going through a tape series with him. And a group of friends, a group of women and men. Thursday nights, I'm at the 11-step group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I'm usually involved in some kind of service activity along these lines. But God doesn't have to even think about where to find me, because it knows. Oh, it's Thursday, the 11th step. When I was 13 years sober, I hit a wall in my... Up until then, I was sober man, armed with steps, concepts, and traditions, able to transcend any life situation with the application of the spiritual principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, it used to be that when I went to speak at AA meetings or when I was called to participate, I was so serious, man, I made the paint crack. Because lives are on the line here. Untreated alcoholism running through Alcoholics Anonymous. We need to stop it. You have a slip here. Give him to me. I'll save his life. And there was nothing I hated more than some dried up old geek in Alcoholics Anonymous that would say, well, he'll get around to doing it when he'll get around to doing it. I thought those people were killing people in AA. But after about 3 decades with you, they'll do it when they're going to do it. I got involved with a woman. You know, I got involved with a woman when I was just over a year sober, and Jacqueline, and she was hopping cocktails at the bar that I was working at, and we ended up getting married, and it was very, very interesting being married to somebody that wasn't sober. And after a little while, she wouldn't drink much, because she's living with a sober man, and she'd make denigrating things about when I'd go off to my meetings, and once or twice a week she'd just go out and blow off some steam with her friends. Didn't look like alcoholism to me. Then I made don't ever do this, okay? Say, darling, you know when you eat that Valium, it kind of changes the way that you are? Because she quit cold turkey and got really angry. Quit doing those freeze-dried martinis, and we, after another couple of years, it just was obvious that we were going to have to split to me. Now, I'd been raised in a family that had been split, so I was never going to, for me to get divorced, it was just not going to happen. And but I knew that this was what was up, and I was going on retreat, and I went up on retreat, and on that retreat, I told the truth to the guys about what was going on. And I turned my will and my wife over to the care of God as I understood God while I was up there. And the most amazing thing happened. She started going to the Al-Anon family groups a couple days later. 6 months later, she came into Alcoholics Anonymous. And she's 23 years sober now. And Jacqueline, when she got sober, it was really wonderful. I was 6 years sober at the time almost. And I got to go back to the meetings. Go to 7 meetings a week. I was secretary of the big speaker meeting in our neighborhood. I got more sponsees between about 1984, the year before she got sober, and 1987. I probably did the best work I ever did in Alcoholics Anonymous. We were out there. We were picking in liquor stores and singing AA hymns, man. We were on fire, and it was a wonderful thing. And if you haven't been on fire, ask yourself why. Now I know that this men's stag group's full of a bunch of guys that are on fire, and that's what we do, man. We run together. We feed off each other. And but Jacqueline and I were not well suited. She'd been raised in a home that there never was a man. So she had no idea what we're like, which is really, awful. And then physically, we weren't able to be really intimate much after she stopped drinking. And at first, we didn't know about this. This was back in the mid '80s, and the truth is that she'd been sexualized as a child, and she didn't have any memory of that. And then when she got sober, when we'd start to become intimate, her body would, and neither of us understood what was going on. And then when she became pregnant, when we decided to have a child, all of that came up, and that tends to be a pattern. About 75% of our sisters in Alcoholics Anonymous have been sexualized young or against their will when they were young people. And, if we're going to make sure that Alcoholics Anonymous is a safe place, we have to make sure that we're safe and we know what we're doing when we're out dating our sisters, and to know what's up. And so just an idea of that. And it's amazing now as time goes on about how many of our brothers have had the same types of experiences. And so that's one of the reasons why we need to also really watch the way that we talk about people that have other, shall we say, lifestyles in our meetings. And one of the tragedies about my stag meeting, because we're a good bunch of men, is that we only have maybe 1 to 2 gay guys in our meeting, and we never seem to get many more than that. And it's a shame that our meeting is not a larger expression of God. Just an opinion. But so anyway, at 13 years sober, my marriage ended. And Jackie and I, we both had sponsors. My sponsor, Greg, said at the time, he said, "You're leaving your marriage so you can go to get in a relationship." I'd been by Jackie. I'd stayed with her while she went through all the sexual recovery work and all that stuff, but it had reached the point where I just couldn't couldn't hack it anymore. And what I was able to do is I was able to sit down at the table and say to her, I can't live like this anymore. And so Sober Man, the guy who'd founded the couples retreat, the guy who'd been talking about the application of spiritual principles, being able to transcend anything, it hit a wall. And so one of the things that I did was I went back into the steps with a group of guys. I was coming up on 14 years sober, and I wanted to do something special to get ready for 15, and so I got together a group of guys, and we went through the book together, that all guys that I'd sponsored over the years that were still sober. And if you haven't done that, if you haven't gone through the book with a group of guys, it's really fun to do. And there's a lot of formats out there. Are they correct? Well, it's just a way of looking at things one way or another. I enjoy using the Dr. Paul's thing that he got from the guys down in Texas, the unofficial guide to the steps. I've used Herb Kagan's book. I've got friends that give me these things, and I just try them. I mean, why not? And but this unofficial guide to the steps has a really good inventory process in it, and so I use that. And not when I take a guy through in the beginning, but in a group. And one of the things that was really fun to watch was this group of, I think there were 14 of us when we started. 11 of us actually did the work. A year and a half after we finished, nobody's relationship was the same. Nobody's business was the same. They were still in the same relationships or their businesses, but none of our lives resembled what they were before. And it was really fun to watch that power in that many people instead of just one-on-one. Sometimes you get to the point that you just go, I'm so used to seeing another man transform and getting that insight. But to see it across the board like that was really, really wonderful. The other two guys that didn't do it, they're still sober. Imagine that. They just didn't do things correctly with the group. And another man was able to die sober. Die consciously. And so I ended up with this fabulous creature, Adele. And we'd been running around for a little while, and she started to get these migraines, and I couldn't understand what was happening, and neither could she. And then one day she pulled up to the coffee bar that I owned. I'm one of these people that when I was 10 years sober, I went back and reviewed my life, wanted to follow my bliss, and looked about, when was I happiest in my life so that I could then, follow that as a career path. And when I did that inventory for me, I was happiest when I was selling stimulants to college students. So this was 1989, 1990, and the coffee thing was just starting to percolate up in Seattle, and so I went and I bought a coffee bar, and I put it on a college campus, and I went back. My business card for years said, Jay Stinnett, purveyor of fine stimulants. And but anyway, she rolled up to the coffee bar, and she just fell out of the car. And we got her to the hospital, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. And all they were doing was medicating her. Every 6 hours when the narcotics would wear off, they'd hit her again. Because the minute they'd start to wear off, it was like Torquemada was working on her. She just got in more and more progressive pain. Now I've just opened this coffee bar, and I'm trying to be a good dad to my daughter when I got her, and I'm sponsoring a bunch of people, and I'm stretched. But see, I'm the kind of guy that I don't get to make a decision whether or not I go to the meeting. If it's Monday night, I'm at the Stag. And if it's Thursday night, I'm at the 11-step group. And if it's Tuesday night, guys are coming to my house. And if it's Wednesday night, I'm over here, unless there's something that, that gets in the way of that. And so Adele's in this hospital, and I'm going up to the hospital, and I'm stretched, and I don't know what to do. And it's Thursday night, and I really should be taking care of myself, doing something for me. But it's Thursday, so I go to my meeting, and I'm there, and there's a woman who's taking a cake, and she doesn't know why she's there either. She didn't feel like going to the meeting, but she's going to come and take her cake. And so she asks how Adele is, and I tell her, and she says, that doesn't sound right. She says, tell you what, let me make a call. I got a friend who works up at the UCLA Med Center. Maybe we can get her in there. And we were able to do that. And I got up there, and I got her out of the hospital that she's in, and I get her in the car, and I get to drive her up to the hospital. And when we get up there, they went, she didn't come in a ambulance. This is obviously an insurance dump. We're not going to admit her. And the meds are wearing off. And we're in the admitting area. And there's a lot of people. And I don't know what to do. So I go around the corner and I say, hey, big guy, I need some help now. And then I did the next indicated thing. I called this woman up that had recommended. I come down. She made a couple phone calls, and the chief neurologist actually came down off the floor into the admitting area. And fortunately, I had the pictures with me, the brain scan, and he looked at it and he said, "This woman's not suffering from migraine. She's had strokes. Admit her immediately." And they admitted her. And a couple days later, they did this exotic brain surgery where they went up their carotid artery and collapsed the vein that was blocked and was causing all the pain with glue. And then they couldn't figure out why it is that a woman that was 35 years old was having strokes. And they started looking around at her, and they found that she had a tumor in her heart. And so the day before Thanksgiving, they cracked her open and they took it out, put her back together. And, I like to say that aside from the marriage that she's locked into, that she's recovered fairly well. But if I hadn't been at the meeting, how would we ever have gotten to the point where we'd get to where somebody could help her? So one of the things that I need to do is I need to pay attention to what's going on in my life. That's what living prayerfully is. I need to pay attention to what's going on in my life. It's like when Jacqueline and I, we were trying to, Jacqueline decided when she got sober that one of the things she wanted to do was she wanted to have a child. Well, great. Sounds like a wonderful, opportunity for me, so I'm all for it. And we weren't getting pregnant. And then I got a phone call, and one of my sponsees says, "Get up here, would you?" And I go running up to the hospital, and he just had a child board. Timmy Bannis' son, Danny, was born. And I got to walk into the room maybe 20 minutes after the baby was born. And I'd never been in that before, in that environment, And it is the most wondrous place, the holiest place there is to be. And I was overwhelmed by that experience. I stayed for just a few minutes because it was so overwhelming. And when I walked out into the parking lot that evening, I looked up at this guy and I said, "Hey, big guy, I'd really like to have that experience." And that was the night that my daughter was conceived. Pay attention. Pay attention. And this is what we do when we start to take away all this outside stuff. See, I'm bodily and mentally different from 90% of the people out there. And I can't live in the material world. I mean, I can pretend to, but I can't stand it. At some point, it's like ashes in my mouth. I need something of depth and weight. And where do I find that depth and weight? I find it in Alcoholics Anonymous, the place that I was awakened. I drank away my soul, And then my sponsor worked the steps with me, and it returned. So I'm a guy that you'll see walking down the street just about any day. I talked to you about being a geek. I can't take care of myself. I'm living in a car if I'm lucky. I walk around looking for cigarette butts and change, trying to get enough to get through a day. Nobody wants to be around me. And now because of you, what happens is I'm the kind of guy that I get called when children are born. And I get invited into situations that no man ever wants to go into. An example is I was at home, and this is probably, I think Jessica was maybe 2-3 years old. Oh yeah, I just started the coffee bar down at Long Beach City College, and I get a call from my a friend, a guy that he knew in AA. His son had come down with leukemia, 8-year-old kid. He was 5 the first time he got it, and the family did all the right stuff. The kid went into remission, and now it was back. And they were down at Miller's Children's Hospital. And Bill called me up and he said, I don't know what to do. I'm frightened. I'm an AA guy. I'm a member of the Hermosa Beach Men's Stag, and I have been taught that what I do is I show up. I can't make things right or wrong, but I can help make them sober. So I come into this place, I come into this beautiful hospital, and I walk into this room, and here's this child, and his family worked for this really wonderful company that was self-insured, and they had all the money in the world in their insurance program. And so they're basically keeping this kid alive as a test case. And I talked to the kid that first night when there was a moment. And I said, look, kid, I don't know you. And I know you're really, really sick. But I'm an AA guy. And your dad needs help staying sober. So when I come here, you don't have to be worried about me. You don't have to be nice to me. You don't have to engage with me like you do with a lot of other people. I'm just here to support your dad. And so imagine this. I am going by this hospital every day when I go to work. And this guy is being this sober dad, and he's showing up every other day, and his ex-wife's showing up the other day, and they're spending the time with this kid. And I'm there every day. And I have always had, before, probably my last 2 or 3 years of alcoholism, I'd always had a pretty cool relationship with God as I understood God. And I got sober, and I get just wonderfully filled. And as I kept going to this place, what happened is that my understanding of God just started to get pulverized. And it couldn't accept what was going on. I mean, I'd heard about the suffering of Jesus. As far as I read it, the guy did whatever he wanted, and he had a bad weekend at the end. Every place he went, there was a party. Do you notice that? He really did. They were always having a good time. And my mind can't wrap itself around what's going on with this kid. And my understanding and my connection with my higher power left. And it was devastating. And I couldn't even describe it to anybody. I couldn't talk about it. It just was gone. And I kept showing up and doing all the stuff that I was normally doing. But it's still, when I talk about it, my chest still gets tight. And I didn't run away. And the reason I didn't run away is because I was trained in AA to keep showing up. A lot of the things that I do have nothing to do with me being wonderful. It's just that I'm showing up. And one night I walked out of the hospital. It was probably one of the worst nights that I'd been there. You know, and we didn't spend a lot of time in the room. What I'd do is I'd come in and I'd get the dad and I'd take him out and he'd yell and scream and cry, and I'd get him to the point where he could go back in and be there for his son. And I'm leaving the hospital, and they had night blooming jasmine all around this hospital. And when I walked out, I smelled it. And it washed through me and all the way out my toes. And it came back. But since that time, I have never tried to describe God to anybody again, except that I can tell you how it smells for me. When we're working with others, one of the things that is a challenge is that many people have no spiritual training. I feel a lot of the times that bad spiritual training is better than none, because at least you got something that you can work with. But a lot of people, they don't have any spiritual connection. They don't have any thing with prayer. And then we start, they come into this, obviously it's a Christian cult, with our serenity prayer and our saying the Lord's Prayer. And then we get around to the third step prayer. And, and then they mumble something that somebody else has written. And of course the prayer is, God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties that victory over them may bear witness to those that I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Then just after this, it says, we found it very desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person, such as our wife, best friend, or spiritual advisor. That's the goal to shoot for, man, the alcoholic trifecta, by the way. My wife is all three. But it is better to meet God alone than with one who might misunderstand. And then there's this line, which I love. The wording, of course, was quite optional, so long as we expressed the idea, voicing it without reservation. This was only a beginning, though if honestly and humbly made, an effect sometimes a very great one was felt at once. So what I'd like to invite you to do, we're going to go have lunch, and then we'll be back here at, I forget what time, 1:15. What I'd like to ask you to do is get by yourself for a couple of minutes and write your own third step prayer. Because one of the things that's been really, really helpful to me in working with others is having them write their own prayer. Because with many of them, it's the first time that they've ever prayed from their own selves. So write your own third step prayer, and then sometime over the next 24 hours, cut a guy out of the pack here and go and say the prayer to him. Have somebody that's here witness your prayer. Okay? And, yes, sir. You can do it however you want. Yeah. Just a second. All right. Excuse me. But I'm trying to get you to think outside of the box. I know that everybody in this room has done the third step correctly, and they know how to do it correctly. Okay? But what I'd like to do is just suggest that what you do is try this experiment and see how it works. And if you want to do it on your knees, that's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing to do. Dr. Bob used to have guys get down on their knees and pray. But many times when he did the third step with a guy, they'd be sitting in chairs across from each other, and he had these big, long legs and these bony knees, and he'd lock his legs around theirs, and he'd hold their hands, and he'd look them in the eye when they did it. So there's a few different postures that are available to us. This is referred to as the Dr. Bob leg lock. So anyway, gentlemen, thank you very much, and I'll see you back at 1:15. Another piece from my fabulous wife, Adele. You are perfect, exactly as you are. If Candice Donardi was still alive, that's what I'd say to her. I would get on a plane, and I would fly to Colorado, and I would wrap my arms around her, and I would kiss her face and whisper it in her ear until her anguished face relaxed. And if her face did not relax, I would kiss her again and know that her face was perfect as it was. And I would tell her that she was whole and that she had done everything she could to get better. And that although the lie that she was sick or somehow defective was in air, that it was not her fault. Nothing about her was in error. I would tell her those things not because it was what I thought she should hear, not because I was parroting something that sounded good in mixed company. Not to tell her that something was good in mixed company or ease the discomfort and helplessness that I experienced each time I was confronted with her suffering. I would tell her those things not because I wanted them to be true or because I secretly knew it was her fault that she was sick, but was trying to be supportive. I would not do them because I am wonderful. I would do them because I experienced what it was like to have the appearance of a sick body and to be unable to make it different. I experienced what it felt like to have people get mad at me for not getting well because doing that made them feel right and safe. I would tell her because something inside of me had changed and I no longer felt doomed. I suddenly and absolutely knew that a change in consciousness and corresponding health is not an act of will, not a deserved payoff, not an A+ on an uncurved test, but grace. You see, this is how we humans deal with other people's ill bodies. If you're sick, get well. You're making me uncomfortable. I may love you, and the thought of you losing you frightens me. I cannot tolerate the idea that I may be next. If you can't be well, be quiet. Don't talk about it, and whatever you do, don't look sick. Your ashen body makes me terrified. If it's not your fault, if you did something bad, my future is not threatened, so you must be wrong. If you can't be quiet, please, please go away. If I can't fix you, I want you to leave me alone. Your physical absence allows me to forget my powerlessness. But Candice is not alive. She's dead because she put a gun in her mouth and killed herself 4 years ago. When our mutual friend Victoria called to tell me and to cry with someone who understood her own grief, I slid down the wall and shook my head. I was not disappointed, nor was I shocked, nor was I angry. I understood, and it scared the hell out of me. But I understood. Candace was a lot like me. For 14 years, both of us had been experiencing physical illness in unrelenting ways. Chronic, full-body pain and fatigue with the associated disease names. Consistent affections, one health problem after another. Both of us had lived through years of depression as well. We told each other that if living through what had happened to us had not been so painful, all the things that went wrong would have been comical. Sometimes we talked to each other when we knew no one else could possibly understand, and one of us was doing poorly and needed hope. For long periods of times we did not talk, but I thought about her all the time. She told me she did the same with me. In the year before Candace died, both of us had become so tired. Living in chronic pain changes you. It eats away your hope like a nest of termites. Only one day, Candace fell through the floor. During the last month, I've been healing from a broken hip, and I've thought about Candace countless times. I've thought about what I would ask myself before I react in the future to people who are suffering and how I would want to behave toward them. Our friends, the Sufis, offer me 3 excellent questions to ask myself before opening my mouth. Is it loving? Is it kind? Is it necessary? And if it doesn't pass all 3, I get to keep my mouth shut. You see, all Candace and I ever wanted was to have people sit with us, knowing we were not broken, loving us, waiting silently, patiently, and expectantly for the miracle. That could have been my wife that died. In Alcoholics Anonymous, we get to live with naked blood. And we get to experience all the things that come in this life. The good and the bad, and the incomprehensible. And we get to be around people who seemingly can't get this program the way that we want them to get it. Or what we do is we have friends that get in physical problems, they get in accidents, they get in stuff, and they start taking medication. I got sober in the 70s, the very end of it, but it still was the 70s. And in those days, the consciousness in the Alcoholics Anonymous that I came into was, we don't take anything that affects you from the neck up. And that consciousness came in Alcoholics Anonymous for some really good reasons. In the early days, people didn't know. And the scientific community was not as adept as they have become in addressing certain problems. And people would be loaded on Milltowns in the meetings. Milltown was a precursor to Valium, and it was an anti-anxiety drug that was given out a lot in the 50s. And a lot of people got drunk behind it, or were just so whacked that they weren't the people that the sober guys knew. And so a lot of folks, said, no, you don't touch that stuff at all. And that's why that's a really strong, there's a real good reason, because a lot of men and women died not knowing. Now, the other thing is that as an alcoholic, I have to be responsible for my own health care. There's a guy by the name of Clancy I, who is the biggest proponent of this consciousness, nothing. You're not sober if you're taking anything. And but he's got a very interesting observation that he made. He said he doesn't know anybody with long-term sobriety that's ever picked up a drink first. He said nowadays they always are taking Vicodin as a result of something that some procedure that they've had or something, and they get messed up and they pick up. And we have to be really responsible that when we're talking with people in the medical community, that they know that we're alcoholic and that there are certain things that we're allergic to. But there are also people amongst us, and I don't know if you've sponsored anybody yet, that's a manic depressive. I had a neighbor, sober guy, great guy, lived in this little place down by the beach. And he was a manic depressive. And what would happen is, there's a real interesting thing. This is, I don't know that this is true, but I love to say it. The people that need to be on medication always are getting off it, trying to get off it. And the people that don't need it are always trying to get it. Well, this neighbor of mine, this friend of mine, he would, because he kept hearing this, that we don't take anything in AA, he thought that he was doing something wrong when he was taking the meds. So, he'd start feeling better and he'd go off of them. And then he'd start to drink because he was trying to medicate the way that he felt. And when he started to drink, he'd start to think. Never a good combination. One night, he's in the apartment next door and he's trying to show off to a girl a handgun that he's got. And it goes off and the bullet goes through the wall of my apartment. So, I mean, this guy needed to be medicated. We need to, there are a lot of people in our fellowship that are in a lot of different types of pain. Some of it's emotional. There are people that have, things that they need to be addressed. Now, my fabulous wife, Adele, was a horrible depressive. Horrible depressive. I mean, she married me. And, but when she came in, her first sponsor was indeed a psychologist. And she said, "You're too sick. You have to work the steps right now. Because we need to find out what is mental illness, what's depression, and what's alcoholism." One of the reasons that the medical community wants to medicate all of us is that alcoholism is depressing. You can't live the way we were living and not stop and not take a look at ourselves and be depressed. So we have this blue antidepressant. And what you do is you work the steps and then we find out what is it that we need to do. Is it something else? Of course, there are people who will kill themselves before, and it's really important that we get a medical help because you can't work the steps if you've killed yourself. And there are people that do it all the time. I'm not saying lots, but we lose probably 3 to 5 people a year in my community. And I live in a pretty large community that take their own lives. And so I think it's really, really important that one of the things we were talking about, what is a stag? It's a vibrant, strong, mature, confident being. And this is the sobriety that we can offer. This is the example that we can offer to our community. We don't have to be worried about demonizing somebody if they happen to be working a doctor for a script, for Christ's sake. And if you don't have a medical degree, don't go telling people that they're doing shit wrong. Just an opinion. A couple years before Adele broke her hip, my wife also is a recovering bulimic. And one of the great things, there's another interesting thing where there are a lot of people who will say, I can solve every problem in my life with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't need to go to any other fellowship. That's true. All problems can be worked with the 12 steps. But there are a lot of different fellowships out there. And my wife, she's a member of Overeaters Anonymous. And because it's about the relationship with food, not whether you're big or you're way too skinny. And she says that she cannot go to the hardware store for bananas. And when she's in Alcoholics Anonymous, she's going for her drinking problem, but she needs to go where people know what's going on with the food. And I have been to meetings of Overeaters Anonymous with her. I've been to meetings of Debtors Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. I've been to meetings of Marijuana Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous. A few of those I went to when they were just starting to speak because, I was trying to be helpful, giving people experience, strength, and hope. And then once they started going, or I was sponsoring people that needed to be there, I could send them to those things. But when I went to Debtors Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, and the like, the thing is that each of these fellowships, they have a language to describe the problem that we don't have in AA, that connects on an emotional level to somebody that's suffering from those things. And so if somebody's got a problem, I really suggest that they go and take a look at these things because they're able to describe themselves in a language that they don't have the tools to. And here's my example. My wife's a bulimic, and she's recovering in Overeaters Anonymous. I come home one night and I look in the toilet. I'm going to the bathroom, and there's something that appears to be bile to me. And I'm frightened. And I'm scared about what I see. And I don't know what to do. Now, I'm raised in an alcoholic home. So the last thing that I ever do is confront anybody, even though I'm sober man. And I have lots of spiritual tools. But I believe from this evidence that my wife is in relapse. And she's really sick at this time. And I stop trusting my wife unilaterally. And I start to act dismissive towards her because I know what's going on and she's not telling me. And this is my best friend. This is my greatest supporter. This is a person who wants more for me than I would dare dream for myself. And finally one day, she looks at me and she says, this is the place where I generally pack. Now, I'm sober man. I'm the spiritual guy. And instead of talking with her, as I had always done, I went to the Steps of Recovery meeting of the Al-Anon family groups in Manhattan Beach, California on Tuesday. And I showed up. Fortunately, I'd been schooled by my friend Bill Cleveland's father, Gordon, who died with 45 years of sobriety, whose wife had been in Al-Anon, one of the founders of the Los Angeles Al-Anon Intergroup. He taught us that Al-Anon's more important than AA. Because in Al-Anon, a family can get well, not just one person. And he said, if you ever go to Al-Anon, he said, you've got a fellowship. You've got a sponsor. He said, go in there and shut up and listen. And I went, and I followed his advice. And what happened is that I started to learn some things that I did not know. Now, I think at the time, I'm like 22 years sober. I know everything there is about the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I know everything there is. As my friend Bill Cleveland says, I know more about myself than is safe to know. Okay? But in listening to these people talk about their family and their relationship to it, see, I'd had people tell me to go on Al-Anon for years. And my eyes always rolled up in the back of my head because I thought they were telling me to go and get some dog training skills. But what I learned there was about myself and about my place in the universe in a way that I'd never seen. And I learned a generosity of spirit about myself that I'd never had before. And after about 6 months of being there, I finally was in a place where I could tell my wife what happened. And she was so heartbroken. And she was so upset. I was the only friend she had left. Everybody had moved away from her because her pain and what she was going through was so difficult that nobody wanted to see her that much anymore. And when she came to the meetings, she was always in such a poor condition that it was just difficult for anybody to be. And I was her only friend. And she said, how could you do that to me? Why didn't you come and get me? Why didn't you wait till the next morning? And I didn't have to make it about her. And about 3 months later, she went and got me one day and walked me into the bathroom and she said, is this what you saw? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, this is what it is. Oh. And I hope that none of you ever get to the point that what happens is that you stop believing your mate. And, this is why I'm here, to share with you what's happened and how it is that I've come through the different problems that I've had sober. And by me going to Al-Anon, what's happened is it's taken a lot of pressure off. And I work a really shitty Al-Anon program. I go to one meeting a week. I got the star Al-Anon sponsor, the guy that I see when I go talk at these things all over. And I go to a step study at his house. But the thing is that I'm in the consciousness and I'm being humble. See, I just want to be there and be anonymous and be a student. And they allow me to do that. And I have learned so much. And I really hope that some of you might take advantage of the family groups and learn what they have to offer. And if you're telling jokes about Al-Anon, quit it. If you're in it, you can tell some really good jokes. But if you don't know, this thing saves lives. It saves marriages. It saved mine, because what happened is that as my wife became more and more physically ill, I kept trying to monitor her behavior, as bad as any Al-Anon would, trying to monitor somebody's they're drunk. And I was trying to get her to not do certain physical things and not go here and not do this, and trying to make sure that she was doing this and doing that right. And are you listening to the doctors? And you're not supposed to pick up anything that's over 5 pounds. And how can you possibly carry that purse? It's at least 15 pounds. And all that kind of stuff. And what happened is that I wasn't her husband and her lover anymore. I was being her goddamn father. And the two she'd had were lousy. And what happened is Al-Anon taught me to step back and to let God be God. And what happened in my home is that grace intervened once I removed myself enough, and God came in and healed my wife. And if I was on top of her, God couldn't have gotten through. So I was the problem. I was the block. So going to the family groups is a really, really good thing, and saying, I don't know, is also a really good thing when you're dealing with people that are in chronic pain. Personal experience about that. I was in a business when marriage number one dissolved. I was raised in an AA meeting that our Hermosa Beach Men's Stag is that if you are separated, the first thing you do is you pay the child support no matter what before you do anything else, and you make sure that that check is $10 more and it's 2 days early. It's not her money. It's your children's. And so I made sure that that was being done, and I didn't have money for health insurance for myself. And so I started making some bad decisions, and I had gallbladder disease, and I didn't take care of it. I tried to heal it holistically. I was talking to somebody much about that. And I almost died. I was so spiritual, I almost died. And they couldn't remove it laparoscopically, so they had to cut me open like a melon. And afterwards, I needed to take a little medication. And they gave me the Vicodin, and I was taking it as directed. But I did the thing that the sober guys taught me to do. Now, I'm sober man, right? I know everything. I don't have to report my... But I got one of my friends who was a healthcare professional, lung sucker Larry. How do you live without sponsoring a lung sucker? You know, I mean, it's just important to do. And I told him what I was taking. And we talked every day. And anyway, it would have been about 10 days. And I tried to stop, and it hurt like a motherfucker. And so a few days later, I said to him, I want to start again, but I don't want to go through that. I want to stop again, but I don't want to go through that pain. And this man said the most spiritual thing, something I never would have thought of. Why don't you take a half? And I did. And I stepped off it a couple days later. But if I'm in my own mind, if I'm the one who's running that stuff, even though I got, 18 years sober at the time, I'm using the wrong thing to solve the problem. So, I suggested that what we do is that we write a third step prayer. And if you haven't had a chance to do that, there'll be some time later this afternoon to do that. I'd like you to get in your group and for the topic to be if there was a situation in your life that you could leave here, what would you leave? I started another business about 7 months ago, and for me, one of the things that's been interesting over time is that I've gotten myself in a couple of financial binds. I've made some bad decisions, and one was when I was trying to keep 3 coffee bars running. And a college came to me and asked me to take over the food service, and I said, oh, of course, it's obviously God's will. I didn't go and get a partner. I didn't go and get money. I took the receipts from the 3 businesses that were going and took all that money and put it into getting the equipment and getting the other thing going. And things didn't work out. and I had taxes that I didn't pay, and that when it came to selling the business, I wasn't able to get much for it. And I have now been able, since in making amends, I've been able to pay back the $80,000 that I borrowed from people that I love, but I'm still paying back the tax obligation. And that my ego and my pride, what I did was I paid the people back and not the government, instead of like doing it 50-50, like any sane person would probably do. But I wanted to finally be able to take care of the men and women that I borrowed the money from. And so I'm in the midst of making those amends, and it's difficult. And in any business, what happens is, at least businesses that you start, it takes about 9 months. Every one I've started, it takes about 9 months for things to start to turn. It's almost like the gestation of a child. And my wife is resigning her position because of her health problems, and so I've got a little bit of insecurity going. Now I have evidence in my life that everything's going to work out all right. I don't know how that all works out. But what I want to do is I want to take this concern that I have, and I want to pretend that God is everything. And I want to leave that here, so that when I go down off the mountain, that there's more of me available in my heart and mind, and I'm not busy thinking. That I can actually, in doing that third step, turn that stuff over. All right? So go enjoy the groups. It was great walking around a little bit. I heard that great belly laugh that comes when alcoholic men are telling the truth about themselves. So I hope that you enjoy your group, and we'll be back here at 4:30. There's free time, but we'll be back here at 4:30 to do a little I'm going to take you through how exactly my wife and I meditate together, so that I can show you about what it is that we're going to talk about, how you have a sober home. Okay? So thank you. Whew. Yeah. Oh, I forgot. Okay. Yeah. About establishing a daily practice. If there's any wish that I have for you, it's that you will, if you don't have one, that you at least start with the 3 minutes a day. And again, it's making an experiment. The other thing that I'd like to, that I think that is even as important as that, is this idea about what our home is. And one of the great tragedies as I travel around Alcoholics Anonymous is how many people do not follow the recommendation on how to work the 11th step. And in it, it's wonderful because it says that if circumstances warrant, we ask our wives or friends, some of us are lucky enough that our wives are our friends, to join us in morning meditation. If you have another sentient being that you share your domicile with, ask them to join you in morning meditation. And it will change the dynamic of the home. The biggest difference between marriage number 1 for me and marriage number 2 is exactly that line. And when I was shopping for the second wife, one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I did is I found somebody that would be willing to go on the spiritual path. It's a lot easier to be physically intimate or emotionally intimate than it is to be spiritually intimate. It just feels so strange because we've got no training about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about how we went about it and then show you what we do, because one of the things that's been really helpful when I've gone around and it's really fun when Adele and I get to do it together. It's really a hoot. But so I got the tall girl, and we're starting to run around together, and we're having a good time, and it gotten to the point where we're starting to say our prayers together, and she says, let's start meditating. I want to meditate. Okay, great. So tomorrow morning, now she's a class of 89, so I've got 10 years more than she does, So I will lead the prayer in the morning, morning practice. Sober man is here. So we get up in the morning, and I suggest some stuff, and we do this and we do that. And we do it for about 3 days, and then she says to me, this really isn't getting it for me. What I heard was, I don't like the way you kiss. That's not what she said, but that's what I heard. And so I go, well, okay, being sober man and magnanimous, tomorrow morning, you lead. And so we get up, and then she does what appeals to her. And then after a few minutes afterwards, I wait, and from my great height, I start to share with her about things maybe could be tweaked a little bit. And one of the reasons that I am so glad that my wife is in the fellowship is that she's got a sponsor. Because the sponsor always takes the bullet before it gets to me. And, she was driving to work, and she just gave her an earful about this unctuous ass that she was with. And, fortunately we've got a 10-step, and I reviewed my conduct a little bit later, and even I couldn't support it to myself. And I called her up and apologized. And what happened is that we followed her lead. And it doesn't matter who leads the dance. The most important thing is that we dance. And that there's a whole dynamic that happens with this 11th step. It's beyond thought. I want to get a T-shirt with that line of Jung's about beyond the confines of mere rationalism. Because there's something that goes on. See, my wife is my best friend. She's my greatest supporter. And she wants more for me. She wants me to be a better man than I want to be myself. And I feel exactly the same way about her. But I forget. I know that nobody in the Parker Men's Stag ever forgets who their partners are. But occasionally I forget. And I take things that she says to me personally. I get sensitive around her. The only time that happens anymore is on the days that we don't meditate. And we meditate together probably 5 days a week. Saturday morning's the one morning if I'm home, I generally sleep in, and she's got her OA home group that she goes to. But so anyway, we have this practice, and so I wanted to show you what it is that we do. Josh has been kind enough to say that he'll stand in for Adele. So why don't you come and have a seat here, my friend?
Right here?
Yeah, doesn't matter. So what it is that we do is that when we get up, this is when we first were starting to do things together. She'd pick a prayer. Anybody can pick a prayer. We read the prayer together. And then we're silent for 3 minutes. And then when we come out of it, we read something that's helpful and that brings us together. One of my favorite, I don't know if you guys have got it around here, but the Los Angeles Central Office has a little pamphlet that they've got called Just for Today. It's actually an Al-Anon piece. And it's the roadmap to mental health whenever I get lost. And on the back of it's the St. Francis prayer. And so we'll use the St. Francis prayer today. But like if you're the Paul's letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13, it's a wonderful piece. The piece that you hear many times at weddings or at funerals. But any piece of spiritual poetry that you can read back and forth is really a wonderful thing. And what it does is it reminds us who we are and what we're doing here. So we're going to sit for 3 minutes, and then we'll do the St. Francis prayer. When I sit with her, I have my hand on her generally. And one of the reasons is that there's an energy flow that goes through us. And it's not just, I'd love to tell you that, it just leads to all kinds of wonderful things. But the thing is that anything that I can do that helps the energy flow between us is a wonderful thing. And so, there's that. So let's do 3. Because it's far better to do it than to talk about it. The couch, what I do is we kind of turn towards each other. And so I start out, Lord, make me a channel of thy peace.
That where there is hatred, I may bring love.
That where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness.
That where there is discord, I may bring harmony.
That where there is error, I may bring truth.
That where there is doubt, I may bring faith.
That where there is despair, I may bring hope.
That where there are shadows, I may bring light.
That where there is sadness, I might bring joy.
Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted.
To understand than to be understood.
To love than to be loved.
For it is by self-forgetting that one finds.
It is by forgiving that one is forgiven.
And it is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. And then I kiss her and we go out into our day. The fabulous Joshua Stendefeld. Any questions? This is like, yes.
Yes, I do have a question. My wife and I do that, but we don't typically just go line by line. She'll read a reading of her choice, or like this, just for today reading, and I read some. Do you see a real benefit in going back and forth by line like that?
Well, sure. The question is, is the thing about the going line by line is that what we're doing is, especially with the St. Francis prayer, and generally when we're doing this, we'll do one for 30 days. But to pick a piece of literature that's going to draw us together and talk about what it is that I'm doing in this relationship. Same thing with Corinthians. It brings it. It's not about, it's not about me. So, yes, sir. Is there somebody else? Yeah. I've been doing this for a long time. I've got a clock here in case I get too deep and I and I go out. One of the things that I recommend you do is on the way home, stop by the store and get the cheapest egg timer they got and set it for 3 minutes. Whenever I get a new sponsee, they come over to the house the second time when I make them sit with me, I always give them a timer. One of the things what we've found is that the Mr. Coffee maker, the pour through, lasts 3 minutes. Guys will do that. They'll pour the water through. They'll go take their sit. When they're done, the coffee's ready. You know? Instead of just standing there and watching it. You know? Yeah, okay. Again, this is a practice that's difficult to establish. There's something within us that resists doing it. And that's one of the reasons why, and I'm talking about just having a daily meditative practice. That's one of the reasons why we have couples. Because we're both not insane on the same day. In other words, she'll say, come on, baby, it's time to sit. When I'm acting as if I may be too busy. Now, we tend to sit for about 15 to 20 minutes together. But again, this is something that's organic. It's not a race. This is nothing competitive. And if you start with 3 minutes, over time it will grow of its own. The great thing about 3 minutes is that we don't, if you get spiritually sick, which on occasion I do, and I will stop for a period of time. I'll have something come that I get sideways and I don't do it. And it's just like running or working out or anything. I've got a fallback, well, I was meditating for an hour at a time. I've been in some really weird practices over the years. I'm one of these people that believe that you should pray and meditate the way we drank and used. Try it all. See where you end up. See where you end up. But there's a little caveat to that. If you ever get around anybody who says that Alcoholics Anonymous is a lower form of consciousness, smile, agree with them, and back towards the door. Because you will never win that discussion. They are not bodily and mentally different. Will Jesus take away my drinking problem? Absolutely. Absolutely. Will my Buddhist practice, will my chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo relieve me of my alcohol? Absolutely. Absolutely. But I got to do that and go to meetings. Because I'm bodily and mentally different. And they don't know that. When I was vice president of the church I belonged to, I never went to the Monday men's meeting. Why? Because the only reason I ever got to church was because I went to the Hermosa Beach Men's Stag on Monday night. I lived my life through Alcoholics Anonymous. And I never ever disagree with anyone who tells me that I should be on some different plane. Because you can't win that discussion. But just remember that we do everything that every spiritual master ever said. We visit them in the hospital, and if you're not, why not? We go to the jails, and if you're not, why aren't you? And we clothe them, and we feed them, and what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous is literally we raise the dead. That's what we do. If you want something to do in this life, that's what we do. So, again, this is worth fighting for. This is worth making a concerted effort on a regular basis to do. And I guarantee that if you make this experiment with your loved ones, and, before Adele and I cohabitated, when my daughter was visiting me, she would come and sit next to me when she was 5 years old, and she would hold the timer. Oh, I got a big singing bowl at home that I use instead of the traveling kit. But and she would gong that. Sometimes she'd even do it 5 times. Big deal. But I mean, if you've got if what you've got is a dog or a cat, they will come and join you. They will. I have had the privilege of being with a lot of wonderful different spiritual teachers. One of them is a guy by the name of Thomas Keating, who's up in Vail, and he's got a practice called the Centering Prayer, which is a Christian meditative practice. And I went up and helped him with some other people from around the country come and there were 12 of us that went up there and helped him rework his stuff in 12-step language so it could be offered to the 12-step community. And one of the things he taught me, and I heard it from lots of people, he said, it does not matter what goes through your mind. Don't try and fight your mind with your mind. The only thing that matters is my intent, that I want to be closer to the power greater than myself, and that I am making myself available. And that when I sit down, what I am doing is I'm making myself available. Any of you that have children, or a dog, or a cat, when you're sitting on the couch hanging out, and they come and sit down next to you, do you ever worry about what's going on in their mind? No. You're just thrilled that they're there. And whatever this creative principle that created me, anytime I sit, it's thrilled that I'm showing up. And something happens. Something really good. So, let's hang out and hobnob for a while, and we'll come back at 5:30 and we'll talk a little bit about forgiveness. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gil? Okay, great. This never gets easy. And I hope it never does. Because what I try and do is I try and share the most costly things with you guys when I'm together doing this stuff. Another article these actually get published in the newspaper every Saturday, and she gets to write whatever she wants. And anyway, this is my fabulous wife, Adele. The letter took 27 minutes to write. 27 minutes. 337 words. Writing it took less time than I spend in the bathtub each day. Less time than it takes to make and eat breakfast. Less than half an episode of The Sopranos. A nap. A lapse of memory. A trip to the grocery store. It took 1 minute to find his address. The information came up on Google so quickly I actually jumped. After so many years of thinking about it, it should have taken longer. I've been thinking about writing a letter for 17 years. I've been talking to and yelling at and crying to the phantom to whom I wrote for more than 25. I have screamed every resentment and rageful accusation and hurt lament 1,000 times in my mind. I ran 3,000 miles to get away from the problem, but took my idea of him with me. Rent-free, the story that I made up about my stepfather lived in my head, retelling itself endlessly, eating at my life silently, becoming stronger and more lethal as I added chapters. I knew that, and I knew that forgiveness would quench the fire. I'd written other letters, righted many other wrongs, yet this one I could not do. I was too angry and too hurt and too frightened to say anything kind. I was attached to my bad memories as an old woman would be to her old, smelly, dying dog, watching it whimper and crawl, but insisting it stay nonetheless. The idea of its absence too painful to consider. No amount of knowledge or judgment about myself could make me feel differently. And then things changed. In recent years, the storyteller grew less and less loud and stopped repeating things. She wore herself down and started taking naps. She forgot large passages and laughed out loud at others. Then today, she gathered all the words and threw them in the air where they vanished. When the last vowel disappeared, I turned on my computer. I have found that forgiveness is not something I willingly give. I'm not referring to saying the words, I forgive you, but feeling forgiveness through me. I cannot will that feeling or manufacture it or insist upon until it materializes when it is ready and has become, even for those things that the world names unforgivable. It happens when I recognize that there is nothing for me to forgive. It comes over me when I clearly see that no one is doing anything to me. And I realize that we are all seeking peace, a moment of it, and are often mistaken at its sources. Nothing is personal. There is nothing that need be forgiven but a story I've told myself about someone or something, and stories need no forgiveness. They simply need to be seen for what they are. The letter was 1 page long. It said everything. It said, thank you, and please forgive me. But mostly, thank you. There was no anger or fear or resentment to it. I was incapable of writing it 1 minute before I did. 17 years was not too long to wait for that. Now a space has opened up in my heart where a story used to live. And once again, I am reminded that nothing is impossible. That's my baby. Now you can imagine what it's like. Corollary resentments are always fun. Somebody who's got a justifiable one and then you take it on, And you can imagine that there was a little corollary to that resentment. I mentioned a guy by the name of Thomas Keating, and I found out that we have a mutual friend here and earlier. And Father Thomas, he's a Roman Catholic. He was an abbot for a number of years, a head monk, and just a marvelous man. And he was out at a fundraiser in Los Angeles, and this is about 6 years ago. And it was at the new cathedral, and all the big money was there. And this incredible spiritual man got up, and he said that there has to be room at the table for everyone, even the pedophiles. And if there isn't, I can't sit at the table. And you could see the head spin. The people that were there, because that was in the middle of all that. And I have no opinion about that statement, except that I believe it to be true. I believe another line that he said, that in this life, what we are called to do is we are called to love the unlovable and to forgive the unforgivable. And that each of us in the course of our lives, we will run across this. Now, I come from, as we all do, I come from a long line of family weirdness, and I think I mentioned to you about that, or maybe I didn't, but I'll tell the story again. When we had my daughter, my wife then said, "We're not going to hit the kid," and I come from, lots of violence, and in my home it was the non-alcoholic that the violence came from, and one of the reasons why I left the marriage was that I saw that I was starting to play out the same dynamic that had happened in my home. That I was not able to be honest with my first wife about how it is that I was really feeling about the fact that we were unable to be intimate together. And, I knew that she wanted to be intimate with me, but we couldn't, for whatever reasons, we couldn't be. And every time we tried, it was very, very difficult. And it came from her being sexualized as a child. But what happened is that my frustration and my inability to work things out with her, I triangulated it to my daughter. And she'd just be busy being a kid, and then she'd do something, and I would get angry at her, and I would rage at her, instead of being responsible for my feelings with the person that I was not being authentic with. Pain that is not transformed is transferred. Pain that is not transformed is transferred. And luckily for you and I, where we are is we're in Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the greatest agent of transformation that we've seen in this era of history. There's a guy by the name of David Hawkins. There's a great book by the name of Power versus Force. Very, very hopeful book. And he did some calibration on, he does this thing of calibrating the vibrations of different things, books, movements, this, that, and another thing. And one of the things that he did was he calibrated Alcoholics Anonymous. And he found that it was higher than just about any other. There was more truth in the book Alcoholics Anonymous than almost any other spiritual book that he ran it through. And he said that Alcoholics Anonymous is the greatest social force of the 20th century. And that over 50% of the people in North America have been touched by the 12 steps. Either by, an Al-Anon or AA or GA or ZA, or somebody has gotten sober. Somebody has somebody has transformed. Anyway, so when I saw that I was doing that with my daughter, and I knew that, number one, she was not seeing a loving relationship between my wife and I, a complete loving relationship, and that I was being angry at her, I didn't know what else to do except to remove myself from the situation. And about 6 months after I left the house, she and I were out one day, and she was doing something, being a kid, and I reacted to her, and I yelled at her, and I was able to see myself, and I was able to stop and to ask her forgiveness. And I told her, I hope that I never do that again. And I don't think I ever behaved that way around her again. And so I thought that I'd been a really good guy, and that I had really done the deal. And then a bit later, when she was about 13, I sat her down, and I apologized for leaving the family. I knew that when I left the family that I was, number one, going to scar her and her relationship with all men. And I asked her forgiveness for that, and I didn't tell her why I left the house. but I asked her forgiveness, but it was interesting. Every time that I'd start to get angry, not at her, but at something, when we were out in public or we were in private, she would always flinch, as if I was about to hit her. And I kept thinking, I never hit her. Why is it that she hasn't changed in that? And my idea of violence had stopped. I thought we'd stopped it with me. And one of the things that I do is I go to this place called Co in Switzerland. And it's the International Center for Peace and Reconciliation that Frank Buchmann, the guy who initiated the Oxford group that Alcoholics Anonymous came out of, that the Swiss members of the Oxford group built after the Second World War in gratitude for what had happened with their nation being spared, to try and have a center where people could come and talk about things instead of fighting. And it's a marvelous, marvelous experience. It's an amazing place. And while I was there was a woman from Colombia. If you've ever been to an AA conference, our whole AA conference structure comes from there, where people from different places get up and they give their talks, and then there are small groups and special interest meetings, and then we all come together, and there are other big talks. And the format of our sponsorship, our work and steps, all that stuff comes out of this group. Anyway, this woman from Colombia got up, and she talked about that she'd been sexualized as a child, and the violence that she'd been raised in her home. And then she talked about then when she was a mother, how she treated her children, and how the violence had been transferred to her children. And she said, think about what it is when this great big person is reacting that angrily to somebody small. And I saw myself. And I saw myself. And so that was an interesting experience for me. And a little while later, I had a buddy visit in the house. He was from England. And now this next story that I'm going to talk about, this is my story. And this is my resentment. And it's not justified. And don't take it for it to be political. Okay? But what happened is that the second time we launched into Iraq, I got a little upset. And my resentment about that, because of some experiences that I had when I was younger, were way off the chart. And I was deeply troubled. And we just invaded the second time, and this guy was here, and he looked at me. He was staying at my home, and he was one of these Oxford group people. Initiatives of Change, we call ourselves now. And he looked at me and he said, "How are you ever going to be helpful to your nation when you've got an attitude like that?" He was saying that to me in my house. I mean, at least you say that when you're going out the door, right? But that's the problem when you're on the spiritual path. You get spiritual truth laid on you from all sides. And then, so he drops this bomb on me. And then a few weeks later, I read all this because I'm a student of the Oxford group and the spiritual antecedents of our movement, all this stuff, and I get the pleasure of going around and talking about it all over, and it's a wonderful thing for me. So I read all this arcane Christian literature. I actually get these books, and I don't collect them, I read them. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm working my way gradually through all the books that Bill and Bob read. And it's a lot of stuff. And it's, it's not something that you just sit down and pound through. And I ran across a book by a guy by the name of Glenn Clark, with an E. And the name of the book is I Will Lift Up Mine Eyes. And both Bill and Bob had this book. So that I know that they both read it. And in it, very much like in Emmett Fox's Sermon on the Mount, which if you have not read that, it's a marvelous, marvelous piece. In it, there's a dissection of the Lord's Prayer, because these guys are kind of out of the same explosion of consciousness. And it's a little bit different than Fox's, but it's the same. I mean, yeah, it's the same thing. And in it, it's got some spiritual exercises in it. And so I'm reading along in it. I'm going, well, this is like Fox. I've got my nice historian's detachment going on it. And then I run across this. He sets it up like this. Read this next sentence very carefully, for in it lies the secret of the failure of half the so-called Christians of the world to walk with hinds feet into high places, the high places God has prepared for them. If you hate just one individual in the world, by just that much, you are separated from God Himself. Oops. I did not want to read that. But when I heard that, I knew that for me that was true. And I had some justifiable resentments. And it would burn me. I could feel it in my body. So I go on through this, and he gives a recommendation. And he says that if you want to be forgiven, we got to forgive. Now, I just shared with you the one thing that of all the mistakes that I've made, that I really felt that if I ever got to sit down and I got this image that, remember truth weed? That if I ever got to sit down and smoke a big fatty with the big guy, and he'd go like, so what was it like? And I know I got to hit it, right? and so anyway, I'm reading this thing, and I'm going, and so what it does is it says what you do is you write the person's name on a piece of paper, and that you think about the thing that you need to be forgiven about the most. And if it was between you and them, could you forgive them? And as I thought about this, it occurred to me that there was no difference between these people that I resented and myself. Because with the most precious gift that I had ever been given, what I had been is I had been a terrorist. And in the final analysis, I don't want to live like that. And so I put their names down. I just put Bush et al. Make it easy. And he talks about saying a prayer and putting it in the fireplace. And I did that. And it didn't work. But I don't give up. See, part of the thing about being on the spiritual path is we don't give up. It's like with what Adele was writing about. 17 years isn't too long. So I tried again a couple weeks later. Still didn't change. But a few weeks after that, I did it a third time, and it left. And it left. And a really interesting thing came out of that. About a month later, I talk about this paying attention to your life. A month or so later, I'm hanging out with my daughter, and I got angry about something. And she didn't flinch. And she hasn't flinched around me ever since. Each and every one of us has someone that we have not forgiven. When I was newly sober, I took my father out, sat him down, and started to do my fifth step with him. Or I mean, not my fifth step, my ninth step with him. And he got up and walked out of the room. So I waited a little while. Just after my first year, I went out and I tried again. Gone. Tried again at 5. And then when I talked to you about that group when I was like 14 years sober that we got together and went through the steps, when we got to my dad on my list, I wrote him, instead of calling him or trying to talk to him face to face, I wrote him a letter, and this is what I wrote him. I said, Father, my marriage is now dissolved, and I have now committed every sin that I have ever judged you for. Please forgive my arrogance. Love, Jay. He called me up and he said, I got your letter. Thanks. Click. Part of my resentment against my father was he was a hip guy. He and his wife, his second wife, they were fly, man. They were, before they had a name, jet setter. They were jet setters, going all over, doing all kinds of great stuff, and they were fun. And alcohol wore all of that out of them. Alcoholism just tore it up. And I was up visiting him a little while, about a year after this thing, and I was sitting in his home bar with him, and he got up to use the head, and the bartender leaned across the bar to me, and he said, Hey, kid, you know that letter that you wrote your old man? I said, yeah. He said he carries it in his wallet. Don't give up. Don't give up. A couple years after that, my grandmother Marie, who I mentioned to you, who sends you her greetings, she's got macular degeneration. She was getting older. My father and stepmother had this ranch up in the Wairika area, Montague, up by Wairika, California, up by Mount Shasta. I mean, it's just spectacular. And she decided that it was time to go and live with her son. And so we were going to go up, and she lives near me in Southern California, and so, I was taken up there so we could sit down with the folks and have the conversation. And when we got up there, when we opened the door, my stepmother was there, and she looked pregnant. She was yellow from cirrhosis. And they hadn't told us how sick she was. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen cirrhosis of the liver, but it is a lousy way to die. And so obviously Grams isn't going to be there. Now, my relationship with my father and stepmother from their alcoholism had not been that great. Days of obligation, I would call them. But I just knew that, I don't talk to my dad after noon. I never call him after noon. But when I saw that, because I'm one of you guys, because I'm a member of the Hermosa Beach Men's Stag, I know what to do. They live 10.5 hours away. And every other weekend I would drive up and I would spend a couple of days with them and do what I could. Because my father's alcoholic. My stepmother's alcoholic. Their way of making love at the end of her life was to sit there and eat a couple of Vicodin and drink salty dogs together. This disease runs deep in my family. And here we've been recovered, my sister and I, for years. Last time he got a DUI, he said, put me in jail for a couple days. I ain't going to those meetings. So I was privileged to go and be there and to be his surrogate while my stepmother died. And to show up and do the things that we need to do, you know. And this is what we do as members of Alcoholics Anonymous. That we show up and that we learn to do these things. And I got to have the experience of being with hospice and learning all those great things that you get to learn about, you know, changing your parents' diapers. About doing the things for them that they did for you. You know, and why did I do it? Because the men before me had done it. There's a wonderful book that I'd like to recommend to you. It's by a guy by the name of Stephen Levine. It's called Who Dies? It's an old classic. He worked with Ram Dass in the conscious dying movement. Really important, good stuff. Anyway, so I show up. Marcia passes, and I had the privilege of being there with her when she did. And my dad's a mess by now. And at the funeral, everybody's going, well, what are you going to do about your old man? Well, fortunate enough for me, my wife had driven me to the Al-Anon family groups, and I got some skills. I said, I ain't doing nothing, man. You talk to him. You want to talk to my father? You talk to him. And so he's just a mess. And I told him, you know, sooner or later, you and I are going to have a talk. And but I left after the funeral, and I went home. And about 6 weeks later, I decided to just do a little drive-by. 10.5 hours. And I go rolling up the driveway, and I walk in the ranch house, and I find my father. And he's sitting there in his command post at 5:30 in the evening. And he's in his bathrobe, covered in his own waste. And luckily for me, I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I got raised in AA where we went on 12-step calls. So I know how to pick somebody up and not judge them and get them into the shower and wash them off and clean up their waste and talk to them like another human being. And on the way up there, I'd made a couple of calls because I thought he was in pretty bad shape. And I knew that there was a VA that would take him in. And I said, Dad, I found a place. And I'm not talking to you about going to the silly meetings or anything, but I think we got to get you detoxed. And the next morning when I got up, he said, Jay, I've been thinking all night. I'm not going. But I did what you guys taught me to do. I ran away and I drank a double espresso and I sat for a while and I meditated and I made a few phone calls to the sponsor and the wife and my good friend Bill Cleveland and got, and I went back into the house and I said, okay, Pops, that's fine. Can I go to the store for you? What can I do? And I left. And I tried to get a hold of him, for the next few days, for the next week and a half. Didn't call the neighbors and have them go check on him. And finally I got a phone call from him. And he said, Jay, I'm about half mad at you. Really? Why is that? He said, I had no idea it would be that tough. And my old man kicked 1.5 quarts of vodka, a couple 6-packs of beer, and a dozen Vicodin a day habit by himself. And I said, oh my God, man. Good job. I said, Ray Milland had it right in the last weekend, didn't he? And he went, yeah, he did. And so anyway, my dad stopped drinking. And physical sobriety is a wonderful thing. Just physical sobriety. And I got to see my old man without the mask of alcohol. And it was a wonderful, wonderful gift. At Christmas, he came down and he spent time at his mother's house, and he was able to repair his relationship with his mother. And it was really fun. And then he went back up, and my sister was up visiting him. I used to talk to him. He'd say, like, when he was wanting to have a Virgin Mary, I'd say, well, this is why I don't drink Virgin Marys, Dad. You know, I talked to him about the physical allergy and all that stuff. And my sister's up there. She's an active member. She's getting phone calls all the time while she's there from her sponsees. My dad says, well, what's a sponsor? And so she tells him. And he goes, well, I guess Jay's my sponsor. You know. She's up there a few months later, and she calls me, and she says, you better get up here. The old man's pretty sick. So I drove up, and he was really sick. And he had this really fast-growing cancer in his lungs. And so you let him be a cowboy for a day. Always let him be a cowboy. And then the next day I took him to the hospital, and he was almost dead when I got him there. And they got him kind of patched up a little bit and, you know, found out what was wrong with him. And they said, I said, what we can do is we can do this kind of surgery on you, and if we take part of your, you know, we take the one lung and we give you chemotherapy twice a week for 6 months, there's a 50% chance that you'll live 2 years. And after they left, I said to him, Dad, that's a pretty shitty hand. And he said, yeah. He didn't like doctors, but he was thinking about going along with it. And I said, did you hear what they said to you? And he said, well, yeah, I think so. So I repeated it to him, and he said, that's a horrible hand. And he said, what do you do? What do you think we should do? And I say we fold. I said, let's go back to the ranch. I won't leave you. I got skills. And we did that. While I was there in Medford, Oregon, I went to an AA meeting. And when I was at that AA meeting at the clubhouse, horrible meeting, I found out there was a meeting at the hospital the old man was in. That was a better meeting. And while there, they didn't realize that sober man was there when I came walking in. So what do? You go over by the literature table, right? And there was a flyer for the Rogue River Roundup. And at that roundup, which was the next weekend, one of my dearest friends, a woman by the name of Mildred Frank, who I hope that someday you guys get to hear, one of my spiritual advisors. Part of her story is about working with her sister dying and how you go about doing that. She's the one who'd given me the encouragement, you know, so that I knew what to do when I was there for Marcia. She was the one who told me that if you're a sober person and you show up, the way will be clear and you will do exactly what needs to be done. And I believed her. And she's speaking at the roundup. So I get to take the old man home, brought my sister and my grandmother in, go up and get time to spend with my glorious friend, hear her talk, have dinner with her, and go back. And I got to be there with my father when he passed. Now, all we ever want is for our fathers to be proud of us. And many of us think that the way that we're supposed to do that is to be tough guys. And I was able to be there for my father in the face of death and not be afraid. And while he's starting to pass, I was reading him spiritual literature, but I could see that it wasn't working real well. He wasn't being consoled by it. And so I stopped. And I just picked the sports page up. And I started to talk to him about baseball. And he started to die. And, and being there at those times, death is just like birth. Some of them are difficult, some of them are easy. But it's all just part of the process. And to have the privilege to be there, I believe that the holiest place that you can be is the birthing room. And the second holiest place that you can be is in the room when somebody passes from this life. And I got to be there when the old man died. And not only that, my intuitive voice was working. I didn't want my grandmother and my sister to see him while he was going through the throes. But when he settled down, something said, go get him. And I got to go get him. And my sister and my grandmother came in. I backed out, then my sister backed out. And my grandmother was able to sit there with his son as he passed. And she said, all he did was look at me and smile. Now, I've been a spiritual whack job for a long, long time. Okay? But my dad chose to leave this life on the 25th anniversary of my coming to you, on the 2nd day of May in 2004. And when that happened, I took the next leap because I know that there's so much more going on than I have any idea. And that everything is just fine. And that there's nothing that we have to worry about. But what we get to do in this life is we get to go and we get to represent. And that that each of us has people that we have not forgiven. And, that while you're here tonight, if you can, write down those people's names. And we'll put a little something up here and just come up and take the piece of paper and rip it up and drop it in. And we'll give it to somebody to take down the hill because they don't want stuff burned here. And we'll make sure that gets given to the flame. But don't leave here without at least making the experiment. Just pretend for a minute. And if you got more than one resentment, or if that person is you, put your name down there. Okay? So, thank you very much, and let's go off. Thank you. Once again, a little something from the fabulous one, Adele Shea. I fell in love with my husband Jay for the first time last weekend. Though we've spent more than 12 years together, I had never seen him before. And then I did. What I had seen before that moment was a story. I wrote about who he is and what he will or will not do. I saw black hair, then gray hair, then ear hair. I saw behaviors I deemed as good and bad and appropriate and not. And I responded according to my perceptions at any given time. This day he was good, that bad. This moment he was doing it right, that wrong. This moment he was wise, that deluded. This moment his appearance was acceptable, that unacceptable, and on the story went. Each time I read my story about whom he is, whether he was in the room or not, I would feel happy or sad, angry or loving, irritated or accepting. Inside those thoughts, who can be seen? There is no presence inside a thought, no illumination of what is appearing. What I saw were my own opinions, which I reacted to accordingly. Great suffering existed in living like that, even with a husband whom I thought I adored. Then the light came on, and there he was before me. Beautiful beyond description. And in that moment, I realized that I had never seen anyone or anything before. A startling realization I highly recommend. Jay appears different to me now. His ear hairs do not bother me. His face is perfection. His body exquisite. There is nothing to change in him or his behavior. There is nothing to change in me. How do perceptual changes like that happen? I have absolutely no idea. But I have a story. And this is a story of what appeared to happen. Perceptions began to change when I began to look inside for answers. They changed dramatically when I regularly began to meditate. That is, to simply to sit and to watch my thoughts. And when I began to hang out with people who had a higher state of consciousness, for lack of a better term, about how to look inside for answers. 13 years ago, I began thinking with my eyes closed for 3 minutes a day. When Jay and I began dating, we began the practice together. For years, with lessening intensity, I felt as though I would crawl out of my skin during that time. No peace existed in those sessions for a long time. My mind would frantically search for and seize thoughts. Then flashes of quiet would come without words. A feeling of perfect okayness would overcome me for a nanosecond, and then longer. A deep sigh would fill me. In those instances, there was nothing to do, nothing to fix, nothing to change. Sometimes I practiced that discipline for one day and then not for a week or a month. Other times I did it more consistently for a while and then not and then again. Trying to make myself meditate for 20 or 30 minutes during that period did not work for me. I found it impossible to return to that amount of time once missed, so I would simply stop sitting for long periods. I did not stop shaving my armpits or wear patchouli oil or levitate, though I thought I was supposed to do those things before I actually began sitting still. I did try listening to my breath and using a contemplative word. Mine was shalom, to repeat whenever my mind drifted, and using a number of other exercises, all of which were helpful. I found nothing more beneficial than place my fanny in a chair. It was tremendously helpful to sit with Jay. More often than not, one of us would not feel like sitting and the other would be encouraging. I found I liked my husband better on the days that we sat together. Over the years, the days of sitting still got closer and closer. I stayed at 3 minutes for more than 11 years. Slowly, the time expanded on its own. This year, it moved to about 20 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes to an hour, 3 to 5 times a week with a group of people doing the same. The decision to do that happened organically. Attempting to force myself to meditate more always produced less meditation. Somewhere along the line, I stopped trying to meditate. The practice appeared to change rather quickly after that. That's my story. You have my permission to ask Jay how it's going. I want to talk a little bit about being with girls, sober. I was 40 years old, and my first marriage was ending. My sponsor said I left my marriage so I could get into a relationship. And this was done consciously. You know, I'd done everything that I could. I'd been as supportive of Jacqueline as I could be, and we were not able to make things work. And thank God that we both had sponsors, and we were both on this path. And so that when I came to her and I said that I can't live like this anymore, because I could not stay in a relationship that was just a friendship any longer. And I knew that I was going to start looking elsewhere for affection, and so instead of going and doing that, or her going out and spending money, or causing some event so we could blame each other or make something wrong, we were able to accept responsibility for our inability to create a loving union. And so what I did I did a sexual inventory. And this sexual inventory had nothing to do with what I'd done wrong. But what I did is that I sat down, and because I knew that I was 40 years old. My last dating was done when people took toothbrushes to bars. 1970, 1980. So my dating skills were off just a little bit. It had been, a decade and a half almost. And I knew that because I had left my marriage, that I had really scarred my daughter, who was only 5 at the time. And I knew that everything that I did would be watched and observed. And that the only way that I could hope to make amends for what I was doing to Jessica was to try and comport myself in such a way that I could always look her in the eye. Now, at the time, I had coffee bars on 2 college campuses. I'm vice president of a large church, and I'm active in AA. There were a lot of suspects. And I sat down and I started to write a list. And I had to, what is it that I want in a partner? I had never sat down and consciously thought about that. I'd always walked into a room and waited for my hormones to go off, and then tried to have my way with whatever the creature was. But I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I knew that probably wasn't it. And the great thing about being a sober member of AA is we know that there are 2 kinds of examples in AA. There are good examples and bad examples. I could go out and I could Lisa Harley and get some leather chaps and get some ink, and I could, start sitting at the back of the room and try and date girls that were closer to my daughter's age than my own. I know that wouldn't happen to anyone in the Parker Men's Stag, but in our group there are a few. Not in the Hermosa Beach Men's Stag, but one of those other meetings that are around the neighborhood. And so I knew that wasn't the way to go. So what I did is I took a look at the fact that I'm a 40-year-old guy and I got a 5-year-old daughter that I'm going to be responsible for. For me, Alcoholics Anonymous is the most important thing in my life. So if I'm looking for someone to share my life with, they've got to be a member of his fellowship. The most important activity that I'm involved in Alcoholics Anonymous is sponsorship. Therefore, I want somebody that not only has a sponsor, but that is sponsoring people. Third thing that I'm looking for is a woman that has done her sexual recovery work, because if she's in the fellowship, she's going to have to have done that work. Chances are. I wanted my daughter to maybe also have some alternative choice about people that had different experiences. Her mother, a brilliant woman, had never gone to college. So I thought that maybe a woman that was a professional woman might be somebody that would be somebody that... And then I was looking for somebody that was artistic, and somebody that, that in their recovery at least demonstrated some spiritual panache. And then I've got a couple of personal little things that I like. I like tall girls, so, that went on there. And a couple other personal things. And then I started filtering. And I mean, there were a lot of gals that I knew, but there were some that were just serial daters, so I knew that was probably somebody that I didn't want to get involved with unless I was just looking for excitement, and I did not want to model that behavior in front of my daughter, even though she didn't live with me. But again, modeling that behavior. So when I went through all of that, the woman that was on the top of the list was Adele Shea. And when I left my marriage, I left with less stuff because stuff was only there for my daughter's benefit. I left with less stuff that I had when I went to college, when I went off to college. And so I knew I wasn't going to out-hip anybody. And I didn't have a lot of money because I was giving the successful business to Jackie, and I had something that was scuffling. And so I took her out. We went to coffee a couple of times. I realized that the targeting system was pretty good, and I said to her, my marriage is ending, and I know that amongst intelligent women, that there is a period of time that separated men are not dateable. And I know that you're not involved with anyone at this time. But I really think that we could have a good time together. Please do not fall in love with anyone until you have the chance to get to know me. I approached her as if she was the person that I wanted to spend my life with. And when I go home today, I am going home to the person on the whole planet that I want to be with. And I approached her like that from the gate. Now, I've talked about going to these retreats. And I was on this retreat in about 1982, and there was this guy, Father Shepherd, who was leading part of the retreat, and he was an old Jesuit, had a collar on, and he said from the podium, don't screw him. What? What are you talking about? I mean, okay, he's got the uniform on. He's supposed to say that, right? And besides, he's celibate. He doesn't even know what he's asking me to give up. Right? That's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. But here I am, and I'm approaching this woman, and this is the one on the top of the list. I want to play this for keeps. And the more I got to know her, the more I wanted to play it for keeps. The first time I had the privilege of kissing her, I stepped back and I looked at her and I said, I can't sleep with you. And she gave me that look. It's a little forward. And I told her, I heard this one time a long time ago. And I want to try something different. I know what happens doing things the way that I used to do it. I want to try something different. Are you game? She looked at me a little strange. She said, okay. And so after another week or two, when we really decided that this thing we're going for, I said, why don't we do this? Valentine's Day is a couple months off. Let's pick that as the day. And what it did is it took all the pressure off of us getting to know each other. And a couple other things. And remember, especially anybody that, if they're listening to this and they haven't heard the other talk, that Adele has given me leave to talk about this because I didn't know about dating. I didn't know about getting intimate. I didn't know any of that stuff. And we started praying together. And then when we first started sleeping together, what we did is that we started and we went really, really slow. And I'm going to be very Clinton-esque about this, okay? Is that we started out and we spent some time kissing. but we didn't have sex. And then we, got to first base. And we spent like a week there. And we went through all the processes, but we didn't finish it off. And what happened is that each and every expression of love a human being can have as an evolutionary thing, we were able to experience as something of and by itself, instead of something on the means to an end. And so no matter how it is that we express affection, it's complete. I never knew that was available. I never knew that was available. And the most important thing is that the power got taken out of it. Sex had always been a power exchange for me. If I do this, you'll do that. It wasn't that. It wasn't that. And if you follow this path, what'll happen, and I'm not saying that we didn't have a whole lot of fun in that time leading up to that. But it was in stages. And if you follow this, one of the things that'll happen is that other energy will start coming in. And 2 or 3 times during the course of this period of time, there was an event in each of our lives where the best possible response from the other person was for us to make love completely. And we didn't do it. And so we learned to trust each other on a level that I had never experienced in intimacy. We got to know each other because once you complete the sexual act, what you do is you stick them in a box and you always keep going back to that same box. And then when it was time, what we did is we left where we lived, or where we were, we had separate domiciles, but we left our town and we went off and we celebrated and made it a sacred time together. And that was 14 years ago. And a lot of guys that I work with have done this. And the thing that happens is that, a lot of times things don't work out. But people are always able to be in the room together. Nobody ever feels like their trust was violated. Because it's all done up front. It's all done with honor. It's all done with love. It's all done with respect. I didn't know that was possible. So, again, part of being a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous with some experiences, I want to share with you the great successes and joys of my life. And my home and my marriage is the greatest joy and success of my life. Followed very closely by the fact that my daughter will call me and tell me, because I do that with her. I call her and I tell her, I texted her and said, I'm in the Stanley Hotel, Red Rum, and she's a goth chick, so she just loved that, and she calls her father and tells me when the good stuff is going on, I'm in Vegas and Marilyn Manson just got done painting my big toe. There's significant things in her life. And, yeah, she's off at it and having a wonderful time. So, I just want to share that with you, and that they always talk about dating in Alcoholics Anonymous. The odds are good, but the goods are odd. But I want to share with you that if you are looking for a mate, make sure they've got a sponsor. It makes life so much easier. It makes life so much easier. Because I've had time dating sober women who didn't understand that they might have a problem too, or a part in it. And believe me, it's a lot better. The other thing that I did with Adele is I asked her when I was when I was courting her, I said, look, sponsorship is the biggest thing in my life. I said, are you willing to be a double agent? Because I'm working with all these guys, and will you help them when they're starting to get together with women, and can you talk to them, and can you help them? And she's guided some guys that were, I could only in my mind see that without God's grace, them having lots and lots of years of therapy, and maybe someday they'd get to own a chia pet. And and some of these guys are married to the greatest women members of Alcoholics Anonymous in my neighborhood. When my daughter was 12 years old, she'd gotten confirmed in the Episcopal Church to please her father. It's very sweet of her to do that. She says, Dad, I don't believe in about 50% of this stuff. And I said, well, neither do I. It's no big deal, darling. But I said, I'm really glad that you went through this and that you at least learned the principles upon which this nation basically is founded in the stories that were part of the development of the consciousness of this country. And she looked at me and she said, Dad, it's all about the friends now. And I remember that time. I remember that time when my parents had split and I had to go and spend my times of obligation with my father. My daughter had come to be with me. I picked her up. She hung with me on Tuesday evenings. I'd pick her up from school, and then every Friday I'd pick her up from school and I'd take her home Sunday afternoon. And I didn't go out and do any AA stuff really during that time, because I had a commitment. And she said, it's all about the friends now. And I realized that really was what was up. And I said, okay, baby, I tell you what. I talked to her mother, and I said, you don't ever have to come and spend the night with me anymore. I want you to come when you can and when you want to and all that stuff. That kid has never come and spent a night at my house since. And that was like 7 years ago. But she called me and we'd hang out a lot. And anyway, a couple years ago, I said to her, sweetheart, you know how you're... I said to her, you remember when we had this conversation? I said, did you feel when I said that you could go and do what it was that you wanted to do, that what I was doing was I was abandoning my fatherly job? She paused for a second. She said, well, no, Dad, I felt that what happened is that I was now socially adept and I needed to find my way, and you wanted to support me in doing that. And I thought it was the most loving thing probably that you've done. And then I asked her, I said, are you willing to be a double agent now? I said, you know how your stepmother works with my guys. I've got lots of guys who have teenage daughters who are having trouble or doing this or that. If I give them your phone number, will you tell them the truth? And so now she works as a covert agent also. And guys, I give them her phone number, and this is after they've spent $1 zillion in therapy, and they've been to this and that and another thing, and they're getting all the samplings from all the different people, and they call my daughter, and they come back to me, and they say, the kid told me the truth. These are the prayers I have for you. These are the hopes that I have for you. So, let's switch gears a little bit now that we've got the family stuff done. Our co-founder, Bill, had this dramatic white light experience. And then the book comes out, and in the meetings, everybody's waiting for their turn to have one, and they're comparing their insides to Bill's story, to his white light experience, and they're waiting for it. And if they don't get it, they're feeling like they haven't gotten the whole deal. And Bill was very, very clear. Later in his life, he got very, very articulate about this idea of what William James called the educational variety, a gradual unfoldment of an experience. James said that the folks that have the dramatic type, what happens is that experience has been gestating, incubating in their hearts and their minds, and then something happens, and all of a sudden, bam, they get it. In other people, it's the same gestation, but it's just not as sudden. Wilson talked about the only difference between the two types he believed was in the time factor. Because the results, it's in the fruits of the experience that it's validated. And the fruit of his experience was not drinking. And he said there is no experience. He says he always used to tell this story about, you'd be sitting in a meeting and a guy will say, he'll be up there taking his first year cake and he'll go, I don't have the spiritual angle on this program. I haven't seen any white light. And then he'll go through and he'll talk about how the fact that he hasn't had anything to drink, that his wife's happy to see him when he comes home, that his employer is pleased with the work that he does, that his children speak to him in complete sentences. And he says, and those of us who know, that is it. That is the spiritual experience. And he just hasn't gotten to the point that he can put it into those words yet. And so each and every man that is here today has had a spiritual experience. We're all here and we're sober. And so what I'd like you to do in your group is I'd like you to talk about your experience. Now, with some of you, I know that in a group this size, there's a few guys that have had a dramatic flash. It's just a numbers game. And there are other people that have had, as it talks about in We Agnostics, there have been one moment when we've beheld a flower and we've known. And with others, it was maybe the first time that your child walked across the room in a long time and put their head against your chest. Or it may just be the moment that you thought that maybe my sponsor isn't bludgeoning me, that what he's doing is he's loving me. So what I'd like to do, because I think that this is a very important thing, let's spend 3 minutes again in silence, and then we'll can we do the picture after the group? Yeah, let's do this. We're going to break up anyway. We'll go do the picture, but let's bring our hearts and minds together for a moment, and let's ask that we be open so that in your group you can talk about your personal experience. This is Jay the alcoholic. Thank you. This is from Bill Wilson's letter to Carl Jung. My release from the alcohol obsession was immediate. At once I knew I was a free man. Shortly following my experience, my friend Ebby came to the hospital, bringing me a copy of William James's Varieties of Religious Experience. This book gave me the realization that most conversion experiences, whatever their variety, do have a common denominator of ego collapse at depth. The individual faces an impossible dilemma. In my case, the dilemma had been created by my compulsive drinking, and the deep feeling of hopelessness had been vastly deepened by my doctor. It was still deepened more by my alcoholic friend when he acquainted me with your verdict of hopelessness respecting Roland. In the wake of my spiritual experience, there came a vision of a society of alcoholics, each identifying with and transmitting his experience to the next, chain style. If each sufferer were to carry the news of the scientific hopelessness of alcoholism to each new prospect, he might be able to lay open every newcomer to the transforming spiritual experience. This concept proved to be the foundation of such success as Alcoholics Anonymous has achieved. This has made conversion experiences, nearly every variety reported by James, available on almost a wholesale basis. Our sustained recoveries over the last quarter century number about 300,000. In America and throughout the world, there are today 8,000 groups. So to you, to Dr. Shoemaker of the Oxford groups, to William James, and to my own physician, Dr. Silkworth, we of AA owe this tremendous benefaction. As you will now clearly see, this astonishing chain of events actually started long ago in your consulting room, and it was directly founded upon your own humility and deep perception. Very many thoughtful AA students are attracted to your writings because of your conviction that man is something more than intellect, emotion, and $2 worth of chemicals. You have especially endeared yourself to us. How our society grew, developed its traditions for unity, and structured its functioning will be seen in the text and pamphlet material that I am sending you. You will also be interested to learn that in addition to the spiritual experience, many AAs report a great variety of psychic phenomena, the cumulative weight of which is very considerable. Other members have, following their recovery in AA, been much helped by your practitioners. A few have been intrigued by the I Ching and your remarkable introduction to that work. Please be certain that your place in the affection and in the history of the fellowship is like no other. Sincerely, William T. So what we did earlier is we talked about our experience. We go around talking about faith. But faith, I think, is entirely overrated. We have experience. We have experience. A couple stories about mine. I was about 8 months sober, and I was sitting in the meeting, the 2+2 meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous at the Westwood Community Church on LaGrange and Westwood Boulevard. I was in amends. I was sponsoring people. And I was sitting there and I was listening to a woman speak, and her name was Liz Lepresti. And Liz was talking, and she talked about how that alcohol stripped from her everything that makes a human being, and that what she became was an animal. And when she said that last word, the room left. And I was sitting there. I had the consciousness of sitting in my seat, of the chair, and a vague sense of the room. But it was all gone, and there was nothing but a vast white light. And my head said, "Oh, maybe this is an LSD flashback." And my heart said, no, pay attention. And as I sat there, the feeling that I had, it wasn't words really, it was a feeling. And the feeling was that everything is known. And that everything is perfect. And that everything is connected. But we got an 8-month sober guy involved here. So in my mind, I formulate a question. Because I understood that I was in the presence of whatever is. And I said, well, in my mind, I said, well, what about war? And the feeling I had was, don't worry. I got it. And so I sat there in that for another minute. And then, because I'm involved, I come up with another question. I started to ask a question about abortion in the back of my head. It started to come up. I'm asking another question in the presence of all knowledge. And the feeling was, I couldn't even quite phrase it in my mind. It was, I got it. And I sat there, and I don't know if I was there for 8 minutes or 12 minutes. This was only a 20-minute talk the speaker was giving. And before she finished, gradually, the room started to come back in. And this particular church, podium that the speaker's in, is here, and there's 3 stained glass windows. And the stained glass windows were the first thing that came into my sight. And the windows say, God is love. And then gradually the room came back, and I looked around. And it was very obvious that nobody else had that experience. And I was afraid. And I sat there. And somehow the intuitive voice inside of me said, just be quiet. Now there's something to be said about spiritual secrecy. When you're on the path, don't go putting your neck out when, with folks that aren't going to be supportive of it. It's like going and telling people that you buy dope from that you're sober. They'll just go, oh, here, have a free one. So, spiritual secrecy is important as we build ourselves up. I didn't tell anybody about that for about 3 weeks. And then late at night at the coffee bar, I mentioned it to an old timer, and he said, yeah, kid, this stuff happens all the time. Don't worry about it. We don't talk about it in the meetings because we don't want to scare the newcomer. And so I said something once, maybe a couple weeks later at a meeting, and a guy called me a liar and came over a chair at me. And AA in those days, there were chairs flying and people grabbing at folks, and guys would stand on their chair and share. It was an exciting time. We weren't quite as civilized as we are now. And then I went and I found my old parish priest, and I told him what happened, and he said to me, and he had his childhood friend there with him that was also a priest, and he said, yeah, kid, he said, I wish that was my story. He said, but it's not. And he said, but I've had a couple of parishioners over the years tell me about these things, and that sounds like what it is. He said, that's the real deal. And his friend worked at a seminary down in Texas, and he said, come with me now. He said, I'll get you a scholarship. You need to go to work being a professional God person. And I went, no, thank you. Because I knew that with my ego that was not something that I should be doing. I had another experience where it was not long after this, maybe 3 or 4 months after our stag meeting. We were standing there was a new guy and my friend John Cleary, and I had my hand on Cleary. I'm talking to the new guy, and I'm going, And, God is as real as we are right here. And I touched him on the chest. And we all three went, and the newcomer hit the door running. My friend John looked at me, and I looked at him, and he left. And like 3 weeks later, he quit going to AA because he knew that he had a spiritual experience, and he didn't need to come anymore. 8 years later, when he came back to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I reminded him of this experience after he'd been sober for about 6 months, he said that when he took the first drink, the memory of that vanished. He remembered that something happened, but the experience vanished from him. My great shame about that experience and how I processed it is not that I was quiet about it. I knew that I could go running after it, and I could go, But I said, no, this was a free gift that came to me. And it came to me in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I have stayed in Alcoholics Anonymous as a way of being faithful to that experience. But up until about 9 years ago, I lived my life basically as a faithful member of Alcoholics Anonymous and not in the awareness of that experience having happened to me. Not living every moment as if everything is known. It's okay. And it's all connected. And then about 9 years ago, a friend of mine was talking to Father Terry, who's a professional God person, and he was describing somebody else's experience. And I went, I guess I should start to talk about mine. And so I do it when I come on retreats, and I do it if I talk, on Sunday morning at a convention, but I don't really talk about it in AA much except when it's on topic. But my experience is that. Now, everybody in here knows that the reason that you don't want to do a third step is that the last thing that you want to ever do is end up being a missionary in a third world country, right? Because it's not cool. Now, cool is, lying in the gutter in your own urine, right? But I don't want to end up being a missionary in some third world country. Well, when I was 20 years sober, I went off to a place that I go, and I went with I met with this spiritual director, and I was trying to see whether being involved in this retreat stuff was my ego or whether it was a real calling, and I felt it was a calling, and so I went to this man who, I spent a week there in silence, and we'd get together, and he said, after 3 days, he said, "No, kid, it's all right. Go ahead, and I'll help you." So, but while I was up there, I turned my, when you have these moments, when you turn 1 year sober and 5 years sober and 10 and 15 and 20 and 25, these big moments. Of course, they're no more important than the day, but honor it. Honor this experience that we're having. So I turned my life well over the care of God in, a very profound way, and sober man goes back home to Southern California. And I'm sitting there a few weeks later, I'm sitting in this church. Now, when I say church, I'm not saying what you think I'm saying. But I'm sitting at this place that I went to get fed. The guy was a contemplative and very, very helpful to me. Very, very helpful to me. And it was in that place that I met Father Keating. And so anyway, I'm sitting at this place, and a guy gets up and he goes, "I just came back from vacation in Belize. I met a guy who I think's really cool, and he's working with a refugee community on the Guatemalan border, and they said that they gave him land. This woman gave him land, and we can build a church for this guy, and I think it'd be really good to give him a center of operations. And what it'll really be is it'll be a community center and blah, 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 blah. So I'm sitting there. Now and my head goes, oh, well, that'd be really fun for somebody else. I don't got the time and I don't got the money. And so but the problem is I've been meditating for a number of years by this time, and I know that my head is really useless for most important things. I mean, even the food choices it makes are really mostly stupid if I listen to it. And so I go, oh yeah, I just got done turning my will and my life over, so I stand up. I'll go. So I go home to the nice Jewish wife and say, I'm going to build a house for Jesus down in Central America. I don't have time, don't have money. She looks at me and she says, my darling, if you can't leave that business for 2 weeks to go and have that experience, that business isn't worth having. She says, ask your customers, they'll send you just for entertainment value. So I did. And they came up with the money, and they all had the same prayer, don't let him touch any power tools. They know me. So I go down with this group, and I'm down on the Guatemalan border. When I say Belize, I'm not saying what you think I'm saying, man. I'm not talking about the K's and string bikinis. I'm talking about, people that are busy moving. Like 30% of our brothers and sisters in Latin America are moving in one way or another, out of one place to another, trying to find some place that they can stay long enough. And so what we were doing down there is trying to help people to stay, to get a school, to get some stuff going. So I'm down there for about 3 days. Now, I go to AA wherever I am. I always go to meetings wherever I am. And I'm starting to look at my fellow volunteers and evaluating their level of spiritual awareness. And I realized that it'd probably be a good idea for me to go to an AA meeting. So I walk up to this Guatemalan priest, and I say, Yo busco Alcoholics Anonymous. And he dissolved into tears. And he goes, Yo soy alcohólico. And there, in the middle of the jungle in Central America, that man told me his story. And I told him mine. And every place that I have gone in the past 29 years, when I'm thinking that I'm doing something for this creative principle, God as I understand God, what do I get? I get you. I get Alcoholics Anonymous. I just happen to be on the dummy squad. I mean, I'm always getting hit with the big stick. And because the only reason that I do this work is because I can tell a story, and that I'm willing to share myself. It's in our brokenness that we are useful. Sober man is good for many things, but it's my scar tissue that is helpful. That is really helpful. Now, if you could do anything in the world, God calling, if you could do anything in the world, what would you do? What would you do? Would you drink socially and be able to date the twins? Is that what you'd want to do? I ask myself that. Myself that every New Year's now. And a number of years ago, what came to me was that meditation had been so helpful to me that I wanted to do whatever I could to help introduce people to that. Now, you've heard me talk a little bit about the Oxford group, and there was a guy by the name of Frank Buchman, who was the guy that got the Oxford group rolling. And in 1938, they changed the name to Moral Rearmament. And in 1935, over the weekend of December 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, this worldwide network of people that he was involved with, they put radio broadcasts in every nation in the world in that language, trying to get people to meditate, to what they called listening for guidance, so that they could get their representatives to stand down. The most outlandish thing I ever heard of. The most outlandish thing I ever heard of. And anyway, what I did was in homage to him, I got together with my spiritual teacher, and I started a website, and it's called, guess what? 3 minutes, the number 3 minutes of silence.org. The number 3 minutes, plural, of silence.org. And what we do is that we try to get together every year at one day, one moment, the same time for 3 minutes. Folks all over the planet. To spend 3 minutes in silence in any form of meditation, prayer, or personal reflection, that we might find an answer that is above party, above class, above religion, above faction, above race, and above nation. And that we may have justice whereby we see not only others' difficulties, but our own. And that we might bridge seemingly impossible and humanly hopeless situations. Those are Bookman's lines. And on it, there's this wheel. And there are a dozen different meditative practices. There's this little labyrinth here for walking meditation. And if you were to click it, you could go to Estes Park, Colorado, and they would talk about the labyrinth that's here for you to walk. Or any place that you are, you can find a walking meditation. For the chanting of Om, I've got a friend of mine, Tenzin Prataharshi, who's a venerable monk, chanting Om on this wheel here. I've got some stuff from the Jains, their meditative practice. Marvelous, the oldest Hindu sect. Incredible what they've got. I've got some wonderful Sufi stuff here. At the 7 o'clock hour, there's the thing from Initiatives of Change about how to listen. It's the meditative practice that Dr. Bob and Bill and all the early members were taught. I put it in modern language, but it's all in our big book, but it's the actual wording and structure of the way that they did it. And it's a writing meditation. If you say, "Oh, I can't be quiet," well, it's a way of being able to get into contact with your interior self. And then the one that I want to recommend to you is on the third hour. It's an infinity symbol. And if you click on that, there's my friend Dulcie Smith, who's been a student of Joel Goldsmith for the past 30 years, doing the awareness exercise. And it's a 10-minute guided meditation to try, and then if you do it, like if you try doing it every day or once or twice a week, it's a real good way to learn how to get that split, because when we're quiet, what happens is that first shift between our mind and our awareness. And which is the one? And so it's a wonderful thing. And you just click on it and you can download it or you can listen to it. But I did that. And what happened is that I've had a wonderful, wonderful experience in going along and trying to say, hey, come this way. But again, try it like you drank. Try it like you used. There's all kinds of stuff. The only thing that's necessary is that you take the first step. The big lie about meditation is that somehow it's airy-fairy. It's not. It's blue collar. All you do is clock in and clock out. Put your ass in the seat for 3 minutes and see what happens. And it's a great, great adventure. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And along this path, you'll meet teachers. Now, our friend Dave, is the gatekeeper to my friend Keating. He'll be happy to tell you about Keating and about the centering prayer method, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And especially if you're from a Christian background, it's a really wonderful way to go. But I want to talk about my current terrorizing men, because it's a lot of fun to do. Earlier in the meeting, we were talking about what can I take home. How many guys here have roommates? And wives? And girlfriends? Yeah. Oh. Two-bagger. Here, honey, would you put the wig on tonight? Spiritual practice. It's amazing how shallow I am. I just love it. Once I embraced it, it was all okay. But anyway, I implore you. In the book it says we beg of you, and we were talking about what can we take home. When you go home, go to your loved one and say, honey, I want to watch Oprah with you. Okay? Not that. Not that. I want to tell you, something's going on. And this man, Eckhart Tolle, that the boys are going to be studying, this amazing master who I believe saved my wife's life, who I've spent 7 years studying his stuff, who is the only person that I have been able always to recommend to anybody in the fellowship because he doesn't use medieval language at all. Maybe says God once an hour, uses the word love occasionally because it's all been so warped. And he gives very, very clear, simple direction on being present. This woman, Oprah Winfrey, 5 years ago, picked his book, The Power of Now, up and made it one of her book selections, and a lot of people really responded to it. Then this latest book that he's come out with, The Power of A New Earth, she made that a selection, and it's amazing what it is that is happening. This man, who I believe is like my friend Thomas Keating, Thich Nhat Hanh. I mean, the guys who, Pema Chodron, so that we make sure that you understand that there is a feminine aspect also. Marianne Williamson. There's just a lot of folks that have got this, but this is a guy that's got it, and he's very, very clear. She is getting together once a week, and they're reading the book. He actually helped her put together a study guide. And what you can do is you can help to make your home a spiritual powerhouse, and you don't have to say shit. All you have to do is say, honey, you know that woman that you think's pretty cool that I've been denigrating for the past 2 decades? Can we watch her together? And you go to Oprah.com and you can download it. This is week 8. But you can download it, so you got it on your hard drive. You buy the book, you read the thing, and then you watch them talk. And what they're doing is they've hooked in with Skype, and people all over the planet are doing this thing at the same moment. They've had over 14 million downloads. And they're being quiet for like 15 seconds, which, in broadcast media is an eternity. And there are all these people throughout the planet that are coming together. And there's some good, solid spiritual direction and practice that you can get that's really easy. And it's not a big leap. And it's presented very, very simply and very, very lovingly. And these people from all over the world are coming in and they're calling and they're asking questions. Like people that are evangelical Christians calling in and saying, I can't reconcile the language you use with this. And he said, well, don't worry, throw my book away. He said, get any book by Joel Goldsmith. It uses the Christian nomenclature for exactly the same thing. Or people calling up and asking him questions about their children or their relationships. And and it's just incredible. And so I really, really hope that that you take advantage of that. And then if you can stop and join in with the boys and go through the process with them, it will be amazing. And it's only like 10 weeks, 12 weeks long. And what happens is that shift will happen. And once it happens, it's just like getting sober, man. It's on. It's on. And this is the journey. This is the journey. There is no topping out in the 11th step. And you are surrounded with weirdos like Michael and Roger that will be more than happy to show you, they're just like the guy with all the psychedelics. Here, try this. Try this. Try this. Try this. Oh, you didn't like that? Try this. Oh, here, the mushrooms. Try the mushrooms. Okay? You're not going to be hurt in the spiritual search unless you get around people that tell you that Alcoholics Anonymous is a lower form of understanding. I want to read you one thing from a man who had a lot to do with the establishment of the consciousness of Alcoholics Anonymous in Southern California and AA as we know it. And my friend Gil makes his CDs available. It's Chuck Chamberlain, A New Pair of Glasses, and it's a wonderful, wonderful piece. He was an amazing force in Alcoholics Anonymous, and Chuck had this to say. He said, "There is only one problem in this life. One problem that includes all problems. And one answer that includes all answers. I am totally convinced that the only roadblock between me and you and me and God is the human ego. The only roadblock there is. I further believe that the best definition you'll ever hear of the human ego is the feeling of conscious separation from. From what? From everything. Conscious separation from God, from each other, and eventually from ourselves. And what's the solution? The solution for me is in Alcoholics Anonymous. Is in the 11th step and the 12th step and the 1st and the 2nd and the 3rd and the 4th and all that stuff. Don't ever fire anybody. If God sends them to you, you can't hurt them. You can't hurt them. And who are we to throw anyone away? Always answer the phone. There is no conflict with spiritual truth. Always say yes. And everybody always goes, well, they're going to say that I have to go they asked me to set up chairs New Year's Eve. If you've got a commitment to your family, you have a commitment. It's okay. And there is no conflict there. There is no conflict there. But always say yes. Always say yes. Say a couple more words, and then I want to seal this with 5 minutes of quiet. My card's up here with the website, my phone number, my email address. I have no idea why we were together this weekend. But I know that I am responsible. And that if you ever want to talk, all I'm really going to tell you is, do you have a sponsor? Are you sponsoring people? Are you? So, but I am available. And it's my great privilege. And if you come through Los Angeles, call me. Or if there's somebody you know who's coming, I'll make sure you get to a good AA meeting, you know. And if it's a woman, my wife will do the same. The holiest place in the world is being in the birthing room. The second holiest place is being in the room where it gives the appearance that someone is dying. But the third holiest place is at the kitchen table, turning pages, sharing the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Each and every man in here, there is a life whom you are destined to save. And if you're not in the meeting, if you're not making yourself available, what will happen when that man comes through the door? You can't hurt him. Open your heart and have the experience of sitting there when a man goes, oh my gosh, this will work for me. I am like that. I can do this with God's help. To be there at the second birth is the most amazing experience that anyone can have. And it is a worthwhile ride of excitement. Talk to any of us that have been around for a little while. You know, it's a marvelous, marvelous thing. I love this piece. It's attributed to our Hopi brothers, and I think it probably is a wonderful, wonderful expression of the Parker Men's Stag. This supposedly was written just after 9/11. You have been telling people that this is the 11th hour. Now you must go back and tell the people that this is the hour. And there are things to be considered. Where are you living? What are you doing? What are your relationships? Are you in right relation? Where is your water? Know your garden. It is time to speak your truth. Create your community. Be good to each other. And do not look outside yourself for the leader. This could be a good time. There is a river flowing very fast. It is so great and so swift, and there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel they are being torn apart. They will suffer greatly. Know the river has a destination. The elders say, we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above the water. See who is there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment we do, our spiritual growth comes to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and your vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. We are the ones that we have been waiting for. Thank you. Let's do 5 minutes of silence.